All right.
Okay, I can see the screen now.
Peter,
Peter, can you hear us? You can't hear a thing. All right. I'm going to call the meeting to order then. Are you ready, gentlemen? All right.
I'll make sure he's ready.
Okay, make sure that you can go.
Are you ready for me to bring them?
Hang on,
back?
let's make sure, let's get everything set and then,
So Murphy
You say
says,
somebody isn't available,
yeah, KPR is not available.
COVID.
so they have nobody here?
There's a COVID issue.
So what are we gonna do?
You're going to have to just revisit them. You talk about that afterwards.
Yeah, but they may have the benefit of,
I know, I understand.
but that's okay. Just leave them to me. I'll cross-examine.
Very good.
He'll only be able to hear you talking to him.
I'll get them up on the stand. We'll square them. Right, so today,
Peter, can you hear this?
Yes, I can. I can hear everything. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay,
we
yep,
can
you're
hear you.
on.
unfortunately, I mean, yes,
You hear him,
Thank you.
unfortunately.
Thank you, Chairman Stone. I appreciate that.
Okay.
are you COVID-free?
We allowed to ask that question.
Good question.
Really not.
All right, I want to welcome everybody to the January 18th, 2022 meeting of the Yarmouth Board of Selectmen. And I'm going to call this meeting to order. And before we begin, I'm going to just read this notice that we have to provide given the COVID situation. So this is to formally advise that as requested under Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, and pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, an act relative to extending COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency and signed into law on June 16th, 2021, that the Yarmouth Board of Selectmen is holding a public meeting on Tuesday, January 18th, 2022, at 5 p.m. in the hearing room in Yarmouth Town Hall on Route 28 in South Yarmouth. The public is welcome to attend either in person or via the alternative public access provided in our meeting notice. And on our agenda, there's a Zoom meeting notice, and that can be found on our website at www.yarmouth.ma.us. So without any further ado, I would like to ask you to join me in a pledge of allegiance to the flag.
Allegiance to the flag of the United
The United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would also like to make a note that Selectman Peter Smith is joining us today by remote. He's on a Zoom link and calling in and zooming in. So there we go. So the first order of business is to begin the interview process. For folks that are watching at home, you can go ahead and bring folks here. But for people that are watching at home, we are interviewing candidates for the position of town council. This is the position occupied generally by a law firm. And we are going to be interviewing the candidates that have sort of made the short list, so to speak. And there are 3 firms that made the short list. We've been just informed that one of those firms will be unable to join us. So we'll be interviewing 2 of those firms tonight, and we'll have some discussion before we adjourn as to how to deal with the firm that is unfortunately absent. This was a last minute change from what I understand. So in any event, Sarah has left us to go bring in the first candidate. The firm is Murphy, Hesse, Toomey, and Lehane, LLP. We all have been given copies of the proposals from each of the candidates, and we have obviously a fairly lengthy and detailed document from this firm that I'm sure you've all studied and read. Peter, while you were getting yourself set up on Zoom, I just want you to know the board divided up just in the interest of moving the meeting along. We basically divided up some questions among the board members. So we will I hope you have the list of questions with you. You might want to put them and make some notes. Procedurally, we're going to go through the questions, but keep them very similar to each of the candidates.
You ready?
Yep, come on in.
Mark, I have all the questions in front of me, and so I'm ready to go, as they say.
Very good. Welcome. Welcome to the Town of Yarmouth and the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you.
And I want to just mention that one of our selectmen is unable to be with us, Peter Smith. So he'll be joining us on Zoom.
Wonderful.
So I think you know who we are. We have our names here. But please, what I'd like to do is just start off with you folks introducing yourselves and talk about your background and experience in providing general town council services to municipal clients, and discuss a little bit how much of your workload is in the municipal area. So let's start with that, and I'll turn it over to you.
My name is Attorney David DeLuca. I'm the, as obvious senior member of this group, and I'm happy to introduce ourselves to you. To my left is my colleague Karis North. To my right, Peter Mello. Between the three of us, I would guess there's probably decades of municipal experience. And that actually is really just a speck of time in comparison to the full experience that we have as a law firm. Murphy, Hesse, Toomey, and Lehane has been active in municipal and labor practice since approximately 1985. And we have operated in both public and private areas. I think it's fair to say that we are one of the more established law firms outside of Boston with our labor in municipal practice. And I want to emphasize that we are a sort of a blended firm, and we find some real synchronicity between our labor practice and our municipal practice. There's a great deal of overlap between those two practice areas, and each of us has some experience, or at least we're conversant with some of those details that really helps, I think, in our municipal practice. We represent, as town council, 9 different towns, all of which are very similar in size and depth and demographic to the town of Yarmouth. We have a wide geographic scope of practice. I apologize, sorry. That includes towns on the North Shore, towns in Metro West, and we've represented clients here on the Cape. We are, as I said, believed to be a full service law firm, and we're very proud of our experience in this practice area. We have, I think, I hope, completed as thoroughly as possible responses to your requests for proposals. And in particular, we paid very close attention to the very thoughtful questions that were asked in sections 5 and 6. We're certainly prepared to respond to any particular questions you have about our practice area. Let me just emphasize again, we're practicing lawyers, and we feel very comfortable with our skill sets. And in fact, all of the lawyers you'll meet tonight all of whom we know well, and we know that they too are skillful. But what sets us apart is the same thing that I think that each of you would be looking for from your family doctor. A relationship that you can be comfortable with and confident in, that you're getting the best service that you could possibly get, and the dedication that we provide to your needs. It's really important to us for our clients to know that they're number one to us. We make ourselves available on a 24/7 basis, which is now the reality, frankly, with the electronic capabilities that we have today. I take great pride in letting clients know that it's their matter that comes first, and that you'll get a response from us within hours of your request, if not immediately. I consider that to be not just a technical relationship, but a counseling relationship. That's, to us, is really the essence of practice, to provide the knowledge, understanding, and advice to clients on a daily basis. We really look forward to that. So I don't want to just prophesize any longer. I want to respond to any questions you have, and also give my colleagues a chance to tell you a little bit about ourselves.
That's great. If I don't know if your colleagues would like to say a few
Yes,
words
why don't I
before we go on to the next.
You then about
Sure.
your area of practice.
Sure. So as David said, I'm Attorney Karis North. I have been with Murphy Hesse going on 16 years and have been working in the municipal field for that entire time. I've been practicing law for about almost 25 years now. I am a problem solver. My background is in environmental law and litigation, which led me into municipal law. And my practice now is really about 100% municipal law. I am the lead town counsel for the town of Natick. I also provide special counsel services to the town of Burlington on 40B projects, to the town of, Burlington, I do environmental work for them. Dartmouth, I do 40B projects for them. And Cohasset, I do land use and environmental work for them as well. So I bring that element of experience to our team. And I also work with many of our other communities. I work with the Airport Commission in the town of Norwood, which I think is relevant to your relationship with Barnstable. Spent a lot of time working with that commission and Special Airport Council. I also work with the town of Danvers and do some work with the town of Situate. So I have experience working with communities with harbors and all of the various land use and environmental issues that relate to those kinds of geographical situations. One of the things that we do, as David said, is that we provide you with a key person. While we have an entire team of folks with expertise working, and we have a lead counsel, and Peter will be the lead counsel for this project, and I will be his backup. And one of us will always be available, to answer your questions and work with you and develop that relationship. There might be other work assigned to other lawyers based on expertise, because we all collaborate. We meet together as a group on a monthly or bi-monthly basis. We share our expertise, and in that way, we also provide efficient services to the client, because we don't start from scratch with almost anything. While there are plenty of new and novel issues out there, there is usually something or some element or that someone has looked at before, and that goes to the decades of experience that our practice group has. So I'll leave that and pass it on to Peter.
Sure. Thank you, Karis. Thank you, David. My name is Peter Mello. I've been with the firm since 2019, but have practiced in this field for nearly 20 years, almost exclusively. Really, since I joined the firm, my practice has expanded somewhat. I've taken on more private clients, and I also work a fair amount with the firm's educational clients. We have a pretty big education law group. This morning, I argued on behalf of school districts in the litigation challenging the school mask mandate in Massachusetts. For anyone who's interested, that footage is available on the appeals court's YouTube page if you want to see me in action. But so my experience in this realm stretches back nearly 20 years. I've represented in both an advisory capacity and in a litigation context dozens of municipalities, special counsel, or clients of the firms whom the firms that I've been with have served as town counsel for. I'm active in the municipal law community in Massachusetts. I served in 2020 as the president of the Mass Municipal Lawyers Association and have been an executive board member of that organization for many years. And I think that David and Karis have summarized quite well some of the firm's philosophies and core sort of tenets. And I'm not sure that I could do any better than they did in that respect, but my own personal philosophy is to bring a lot of energy to my clients, to be a good listener and try to work very proactively. As a litigator, I know the pitfalls of litigation and how best to avoid them and how best to avoid litigation altogether. And I try to emphasize that in my practice because it's a very inefficient and costly endeavor. And I think we're all familiar as people who function in this realm of municipal government. I think we're all mindful of how constrained city and town resources are and how important it is to conserve costs and be efficient in terms of the services you're providing. So, but I think the best availability, as I say, or the best ability is availability, and that's something, as David said, is just a sort of a reality of professional life these days. It's something we have to be comfortable with, and I recognize that the problems that you deal with in this world are fast paced and they require responsiveness and timely action, and that's just part of part and parcel with what we do, and that's an important part of my practice.
I think it's also worth mentioning, Peter, that Peter represents the town of Holbrook in their relationship with the Holbrook Randolph Braintree Water District. We know that that's the water district and water management here on the Cape is critical. So I think there's a lot of experience that could translate very well and that would be relevant here. I also think it's worth noting, we included as a page in our proposal what our expenses have been like for other similarly situated towns. So we've given you an idea of what our annual legal costs have been to other towns that we represent. And I think we compare quite favorably to our colleagues that do municipal work in terms of what our annual expenses are like. We'll always work with towns in order to achieve economy in those matters. Where, as Peter said, we're not averse to litigation where it's necessary. We know that that's an unfortunate reality, but we're constantly working to find results for our municipal clients that are the right result, number one, but number two, the type of result that doesn't come with a great deal of expense. And that really, mostly experience, I think, gives us an advantage in that way. So again, we're prepared to answer any questions that you may have about our particular practice area. As Karis said, she's kind of got an interest in expertise. I know it's a lot of environmental and 40B. I personally do a lot of litigation and licensing. Peter does a lot of litigation and work with, as I said, the water district, education, and other reasonable client matters. So again, any questions you may have, we're delighted to respond to.
No, we appreciate that. Thank you. What we're going to do is each member of the board will have a group of questions.
Okay.
And we'll start with Selectman Post. And then the next Selectman will be Mr. Horgan, and then Mr. Stone, and then Mr. Smith, who will be chiming in from Zoom. So I'm going to move the next portion of the questioning to Selectman Post.
Good evening. Thank you for your opening remarks and for being here tonight and your interest in serving Yarmouth. Can you describe your firm's experience with town meeting, election issues, including drafting warrants, ballot questions, bylaws, and other forms, and conducting town meetings and elections?
Want me to start?
You're the time, no.
Yeah. Sure. So as I mentioned before, I am the lead town council for Natick, which is a representative town meeting that has by charter 2 town meetings a year, a spring and a fall, that go multiple nights. And when I say multiple nights, I mean the year before, I think we went 11 in our fall town meeting. So I've spent a lot of time in town meeting. I work with the various boards from the beginning. I'm not even sure where to start, but I start working with them pre-warrant. I'm working with the planning board now. We just opened our warrant for our spring town meeting, which will be in mid-April. I work on the warrant. I help develop the articles. I review the articles after they are completed. I will review them again after the hearings and we get the motions. I will review them again when the finance committee goes through everything, and they'll come to me with questions. I may have legal opinions to provide with respect to either citizens petitions or any other articles or questions that are on the warrant. I attend every town meeting. I go through the pre-town meeting review, and then I'm available to answer any questions that either the town meeting members have or the moderator has at town meeting itself, and then all of the follow-up to make sure that the work of town meeting got done. And that will include, and I'm currently drafting ballot questions for charter changes that were passed in the last town meeting. We all do all of that for all of our communities, whether it's an open town meeting or a representative town meeting. Some are more intense than others. Some town meetings are a lot quicker and more efficient. As I said, I've spent quite a bit of time. Elections, I will, and we all will, the town clerks are pretty good on the general questions, but with the pandemic, we've had to become skilled on new questions about, access to voting, early access to voting, mail-in voting, and try to advise our clients on all of those issues. Same thing with town meeting. As a representative town meeting, there's the virtual town meetings that can happen. The questions about for the open town meetings, whether or not you want to change the quorum or all of those other questions that we've had to become experts in pretty quickly, and that changes from time to time and has changed throughout the term of the pandemic. So I would say we have a lot of experience. We've pretty much done most of the things that need to be done to accomplish a successful town meeting for a community or a successful election for a community.
Do you want to see if anybody wants to ask questions on that, or should I keep going?
Do any other board members have questions on this particular topic?
Okay.
I do. With respect to virtual town meetings with representative bodies, have you had experience doing that? Actually?
Oh, yes.
You have?
Yes.
Oh, my.
Yep.
Was this in Natick?
Yes, this was in Natick. We've done, let's see, July, fall, 4 so far. The authorization has ended, so we're not sure what's going to happen for this Springs town meeting.
I see.
But yes, from the very first one where the warrant had already been published, having to go back and actually republish the warrant and make the findings that we could go to a virtual town meeting, then to doing that throughout, and then working with the moderator, the town clerk, the school, and the technology. Much of that was handled by the moderator, but we have a great model on how to do that. And Natick also used electronic voting prior to the pandemic.
Mhm.
And that was something that actually made the transition to electronic town meeting easier because everybody was already used
Plugged
to
in.
using a voting device.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Tracy.
I represent 3 different towns, and 2 of the 3 took advantage of the virtual town meeting option. It was a lot of work at the outset, something new and different for a lot of folks that were accustomed to night out town meeting and doing it the way things have been done for generations. And in a minute, it pivoted toward virtual town meeting. And, again, it wasn't easy, but we kind of all got through it and sort of better off for the experience. Don't know if we'll go back there, but
No, I understand.
it absolutely was achievable.
I have a quick follow-up, if that's okay.
You're the boss.
No, I'm intrigued with virtual. Do you think we'll get to a point where open town meetings are done virtually? Or do you think that we're going to largely stick with representative town meetings?
I'm not sure I could answer that for you. I don't know if you have an opinion, Karis.
I think the issue is how to protect the vote and to make sure that that is, is secure. And
Yes.
that's the issue with an open town meeting because you don't have the same, defined group of voters that you're coming. So how do you give people electronic credentials that can be verified and that they are who they say they are? That's going to be the issue. If we can translate that on a much larger scale, I think it's probably going to be expensive and that might be cost prohibitive, but it's absolutely worth thinking about because it provides much more access to citizens who want to be involved in government, and we should do everything we can to have as many citizens involved in our government as possible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you. My next question is, can you please describe your firm's experience in real estate issues such as property acquisition, sales, leasing, eminent domain proceedings, easements, and other property-related law?
I could respond to that briefly. That's central to the work that we do for all the towns we represent. We stand in that sort of general counsel position to advise towns. And I've often stated that it's a little different than working for a corporation who can, be light on their feet and find property they like to buy and just go and buy it. Or if they have assets that they just want to turn around and sell. No, in the public area, we have guardrails and very specific requirements, whether that's votes of boards of selectmen, votes of town meeting, or a 30B process. We're very familiar with all of that. The eminent domain process is one that I've been personally quite involved in, and it's I would say that it's not rocket science. It's a lot of work in terms of making sure you touch the right bases in the right order, and making sure that all of the details are attended to. But again, perfectly achievable. And it's what we do. I think in general we're I think very, very much aware of the town's needs to manage its tax base with respect to real estate. I personally do a lot of the tax recovery. I have a small practice with various towns on tax title. And, through that process, making sure that the town keeps, its tax title revenues in perfect order. We undertake sales of property in connection with the tax title management. But in general, yeah, we serve as counsel on all of the property management issues in any of the towns we represent.
Anybody have any follow-up questions on that one? No, thank you. Go ahead.
My next question is, please describe your firm's experience with zoning and subdivision law, including all regulatory aspects of land development.
So I have handled many zoning matters over the years, and pretty intimately familiar with 40A and land use permitting proceedings and litigation and the like. I think that's one of the core sort of components of a municipal practice. So, I think all of our attorneys, I think it's fair to say, who practice in our municipal group are very, well familiar with the zoning process and 40A and, associated land use issues, even beyond just zoning board of appeals applications and proceedings and planning board proceedings, into conservation issues and the like. And one of the things that I think has always interested me about this firm, even before I joined, was that our staff our municipal group is comprised of really almost exclusively of seasoned veteran, municipal law attorneys. And it allows us to create efficiencies that I think are hard to achieve elsewhere because, when you're newer to the practice, you don't always know what you don't know. There's a lot of wheel spinning. You can get to the right answer, but it's going to take longer and it's more of a meandering path, if you will. I mean, we know we can get quick answers readily, and we also know how to, use each other as resources. I know that even if a specific issue is less familiar to me, the right answer is, 2 minutes away. All I have to do is call Karis or David, and we talk, as Karis, I think, well described. We work together routinely, and we recognize the value of that groupthink process, especially among our team of really seasoned veteran municipal lawyers.
Yeah, we are just three of a group of about 7 lawyers at different stages. You're looking at a senior group here, but we have, junior people who are also really vital to our practice and able to take care of some of the research issues that they may have more time for than we would. But to Peter's point, it's not just the 3 of us, it's more like 7 or 8 of us that are working in that practice area, and we use one another, I think, very efficiently in terms of being able to give guidance to one another.
I have more questions actually off script, but not related if we have time at the end.
Okay, that's great.
Could I have just a
follow-up?
on that?
Selectman Horgan.
Any experience with redevelopment and helping a town massage zoning to help shape business corridor and the like?
Yeah, we have had experience with the towns that we represent. I personally represent the town of Norwood, and you might be familiar with the Route 1 area in Norwood, and that just recently came under a redesign, and we worked with their planning department to make sure that it was legally conforming. There's a town meeting we have planned in a couple of weeks where there's a big zoning article on that has to do with development of a campus for medical and research groups, and yeah, we're doing that all the time, and I think we could offer a great deal of experience in the area of development of commercial corridors that are central to any town.
We also represent the city of Attleboro, and they do have a redevelopment authority that's related to the city that we also provide advice to and have worked with on property acquisition, property disposition, and then sort of figuring out, working with the city council, the zoning process to, make best use of those redeveloped properties, and also getting into the environmental issues. A lot of them in Attleboro are former industrial sites. So, there's brownfields work and cleanup work that needs to be done as well. So we've looked at it from that perspective. And I would just note that the town of Natick has an incredibly complex zoning bylaw with many, many levels and layers to encourage appropriate redevelopment. One of the things that's been a priority for the select board the last 5 years has been redeveloping their downtown district. and really trying to make that compatible, walkable, both commercial and residential area. We spent a lot of time at almost every town meeting in the past 3 or 4 years with various ways to tweak the zoning and sort of get that. That requires a lot of staff input and big picture analysis, but we're able to support that.
Thank you.
That's great. Selectman Stone, did you have a follow-up? No? Okay. Let's move on to the next group of questions. I'm going to turn this next group over to Selectman Horgan.
And again, welcome. It's nice to have you all here with us. Let's see. Please describe your firm's experience with financial and procurement laws as related issues, including construction procurement under 149, Chapter 39.
Well, I think we have extensive experience in procurement generally under 30B and under 149 and general laws chapter 30. In my previous practice, worked for a firm that had sort of a niche practice in construction law. So I've handled many construction matters over the years, and well versed in all sorts of different projects using different delivery methods, whether it's design, bid, build, or CM at risk. Again, this is one of the core sort of fundamental components of any municipal practice is procurement issues. Some of them are, some of these laws aren't intuitive necessarily, and they can be very technical and not susceptible to ready understanding among people who have more of a peripheral involvement with it. So it's critical to have someone on your staff who's facile with those types of issues, and that's certainly something I've handled routinely over the years. And I think really all of our attorneys as seasoned veteran municipal counsel for cities and towns, for many years have all dealt with these issues. So yeah, we have extensive experience with construction and procurement, but also procurement of goods and services and the like under 30B.
Yeah, we've all done bid protests. Bid protests are something that, it's sort of a necessary evil in the area of municipal practice. We're very well prepared to defend municipal clients when it comes to, well, first of all, to advise municipal clients with respect to the proper process under 30B and the like, and avoid the problems. But where necessary, we've defended towns. I think our office defended the town of Hanover, and is now one of the leading cases on town's authority in the bid process. That's something that we've been intimately involved with our practice. Sure.
Yeah, and coincidentally, Dave mentions the Hanover case, and I actually co-authored an amicus brief submitted by the Mass Municipal Lawyers Association, which was, I think, then known as the City Solicitors and Town Council Association,
Right.
In that case, which is one of the seminal construction, public construction cases in Massachusetts.
Any follow-up?
No, thank you.
Does your firm propose to assign a single attorney to cover the range of legal issues facing our town? Or will a team of attorneys be used to cover our needs? If a team is employed, will the work be split up by the subject matter or availability? And how will this process be managed by your firm?
Well, as we stated earlier, we'll work with the town on what your preference is. Our model, however, is very typical of what you've outlined, and that is we have a lead attorney, and in this case, we propose Peter Mello to be your town counsel, but Peter would be working with all the rest of us, as we described earlier, where we need to develop expertise on any one question. But we will be working with Peter. You can expect to hear from Peter. Peter will expect to correspond with you as necessary. If there are a matter that, for example, either I have additional expertise or Karis does, Peter may give us an introduction to your town official that may be piloting that matter, and we'll work in that fashion. But we anticipate that we would have one lead counsel, a backup, a dedicated backup, and an entire office staff, including our very capable paralegals, law clerks, and assistants that you may get to know on a first name basis, we hope.
Could I just briefly add, I think I said before, the relationship that's developed is important to us, and hopefully important to you as well, so that you and Peter get to know each other and know your boards and department heads. And as backup, I would as well. And if you can't reach Peter, you're always able, and you will have my contact information as well. Assignments and responsibility will be, as that works, will be delegated through Peter, so he has a sense of what's going on. But there will be, generally other people doing some of the work to try to be efficient.
Follow up?
No, I don't. Thank you.
I have just a quick follow up on that. Peter, are there other towns that you are representing currently, and who are they?
No, I would be totally devoted to the town of Yarmouth.
Is it your firm's practice to have an attorney representing more than one town at any given time?
Yes,
That is the case. I personally represent 3 different towns. Karis, 2 or 3?
One and some special counsel, one as town council.
Right. So at this stage, Peter's got not just the expertise, but he also has the capacity that I think is critically important. This is not a case where, we're here and that's the last you'll see of us. No, that's not the case at all. Peter's, I think, in a perfect position to take on a town like Yarmouth.
And being a more recent addition to the firm, I don't, had I practiced here, for the last 15 years or so, that wouldn't be the case. But I think it's sort of a timely opportunity to step in and devote myself exclusively to the town of Yarmouth, which I would be thrilled to do.
My final question is, how do you propose to interact with the town administration to organize and to coordinate the process of fielding and responding to requests for legal assistance, and for managing communication to ensure timely responses and control the flow of requests?
Well, as I mentioned, the best ability, as they say, is availability. And I think in this electronic age, or age of electronic communication, we all have the constant means of being contacted and corresponding with relevant town officials. I do think it's very important to build a good rapport with the chief administrative officials with the town you're working with, and inspiring their trust and confidence that you'll be accessible to them, and to have that good working relationship with them, and to be a good listener first and foremost, and making sure that you're being responsive to what the objective is and proactive, and helping them meet that in the most protective way to the town. But I do think that that's partly the precise mechanics of that is also a function of the preference of whoever it is that you're dealing with or working with. If the town administrator, for example, wants to have office hours, in some municipalities there's a different preference. The preference is to have a weekly phone conversation. I mean, either way, however it works in practice can be fluid and subject to personal preferences. But my thing is to accommodate the client's preferences, habits, and making sure that however it works as efficiently as it possibly can, because I think it's critical to keep a laser focus on making sure that you're not wheel spinning and making sure that you're, constantly trying to do what you're doing as efficiently and as protective, in as protective a way as possible.
And if I could briefly add, that it works differently in different towns. And we would want to get some guidance from your board, from your town officials, town administrators and the like, on how you prefer the flow of work. In some towns, there's strict compliance with, a written request for legal advice that is funneled through the town administrator's office, and with their approval, there could be engagement from, based on that. In other towns, there may be not so formal, and we'll be taking calls and taking assignments directly from the planning department if the town administrator generally approves that. Likewise, as Peter said, one of the techniques that we deployed on a regular basis pre-COVID is to set up some office hours in our client town halls. And in a couple hours time, usually one morning a month, we could handle a great deal of town business right, in real time. We've unfortunately had to get away from that a little bit because of COVID, but we're certainly happy to accommodate clients, maybe even on a virtual basis, to do the same thing. We find it to be quite effective in being able to manage the flow of some of the legal work in that fashion. But the actual delegation of work really is at your preference, how it is that you'd like to control, because obviously it reflects costs as well. You'll tell us how it is you'd like to have us operate.
You follow up?
I have a quick follow-up question. Peter, if you would be the lead for Yarmouth, have you done any municipal legal work on Cape Cod or with any other Cape towns?
I'm trying to think back. As I said, my experience in municipal practice stretches back pretty far. Not as town council. I'm sure that there have been towns for which I've done special counsel work. I handled a case, a zoning case against actually the town of Sandwich years ago in Barnstable Superior Court, and a developer. This is a permitting project in which I represented a group of neighbors, but I'm not that I can recall offhand. In connection with that case, I spent a lot of time in Barnstable Superior Court, so I know my way around that court pretty well.
Yeah, Karis?
No, I have done work on the South Coast and on the South Shore, but I have not done, so I can think of, I think, I may have answered some questions here or there for one of the regional fire districts that maybe we represent out here, but I have not specifically done.
Yeah.
I know our office does a lot of work here on the Cape. We represent the Barnstable Fire District.
Right.
We certainly represent the town of Yarmouth on labor matters. I represent the Dennis Yarmouth School District on workers' compensation matters. So we're somewhat familiar with the landscape for sure.
Good. Thank you.
I just have a follow-up to that. Is that a conflict? Seeing, I'm just wondering, us being do you still represent the school district?
Only on workers' compensation matters. My office does represent the school district on their labor matters.
Okay.
And that is an arrangement that we have with many other communities where we represent both the town side and the school side, or the town side and the labor side. We do that in Natick right now, and we've done it in Norwood and Milton. So it's sort of par for the course with many other communities.
Okay. So the next round of questions we're going to bring over to Selectman Stone, and he'll take the lead.
Thank you very much for coming tonight for the interview and for expressing interest in representing the town of Yarmouth as our legal counsel. I think some of the issues that that are part and parcel of the questions that I'm going to ask you, you addressed, or at least briefly in your opening statement, but nonetheless, these are prepared questions, so I'll deliver them as they were prepared. The town is facing a major public infrastructure project for the development of wastewater treatment to protect the water quality in our coastal embayments and sole source aquifer. What do you feel the role of town council can be in managing the legal issues involved in the planning and implementation of a massive public works project such as this? And how do you propose to become a valued member of the town's team to complete this project?
Well, if I could take the first stab at that, I think that first of all, the best way to serve the town with respect to a project like that is to survey the landscape and identify potential pitfalls and traps for the unwary. You know, with a project like that, it's very complicated and involves different legal issues that I think this is where our experience, you know, comes into play and serves the town very usefully, because you know, you have to be facile with, or you have to recognize that there could be procurement issues, that there could be issues with respect to, you know, drafting legislation. Special legislation may be a better vehicle through which to accomplish certain objectives with regard to a project like that. You know, you have to understand that there could be wetlands issues or other, you know, zoning related issues that you have to account for. So with a project like that, it really can run the full continuum of legal issues, and you have to be, I think, adept at identifying what may arise in the course of a project like that. It's not always self-evident, and it's not always apparent at the outset of a project. It can be very fluid, and so you have to kind of see a couple of steps ahead.
Yeah, and you know, I can fortuitously, I'm not sure it's exactly the same, but Peter's experience with the development, and it was special legislation, right, that you've worked on for the Braintree, Holbrook, and Randolph Water District, you know, puts him in a position, I think, to be really careful and thorough with assistance to the town of Yarmouth in your project. And let's be clear, there's a political element that may be, you know, critical in that particular project. We're not politicians, and we don't pretend to be politicians. We want the decision makers to be able to make the decisions with advice from council to better prepare them to make those decisions. So, you know, we want to make sure that you know, our decision makers are fully prepared to make the decision with, you know, all of the knowledge that we can provide, since, you know, we've had the opportunity to see down the street and around the corner, to know what's there. And that way we can put those decision makers in the best position in going forward with a project like that.
Can I just briefly add,
Sure,
and
certainly.
I won't take too much time. I think key in a big project like that, as Peter said, is understanding the landscape, and then you have to be part of the communication, and you have to be able to know who the key players are, and you have to have regular communication. So on big projects like that we've worked on in some of my communities, we've had, you know, bi-weekly or monthly, you know, leadership calls where we all talk about, these are the issues that we're facing. In fact, we started doing it in Natick for the pandemic on a daily basis, and then eventually became a weekly basis, that we had the leadership of the town, and they wanted their council involved in that. And I think that's important, because there are all sorts of questions that you may have just sitting in a meeting, talking to your other colleagues, that you don't have that opportunity to think about that then sort of relate to a legal issue. And so you've got to have your lawyer in the room at the time because we want to be proactive to think about these. And then just on a practical perspective, there's lots of permitting issues with that type of project. And that's where my expertise comes in terms of the environmental permitting, the land use permitting, also working, and I've represented water and sewer treatment facilities in enforcement actions across the Commonwealth and outside of the Commonwealth as well. So I know DEP, I know EPA, I know coastal zone folks, and can help get through some of the issues that you might occur because I know who to talk to.
Great.
Any follow-up, Tracy?
I have a follow-up. I guess this is specific to you, Peter. I've been here a few years. We've had different council. I think each one of them have approached working with the board in different manners. But when it comes to issues, what provoked this question was when you can see up and around the corner. I guess my question to you is specific to your style in how you communicate with the board. Are you proactive or reactive? Meaning if you see us venturing down perhaps the wrong path, how do you handle that?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's an excellent question because I think this ties back to interpersonal skills that, everyone does have a different style and some people, especially if they don't feel, solid footing, they're maybe not as, they're sheepish about playing devil's advocate. My emphasis is always on best protecting the town's interests, and whatever I think will achieve that objective in the moment is the course or the path I'll take. I am, a nice guy. I like to get along with people. I like to be nice, and as a litigator, I'm much more comfortable being combative. When I'm trying to work with someone, I like to have a good rapport and a good friendly relationship, and ultimately I'm trying to inspire trust in the client and have a solid command of the subject matter. And that's not always, I think people I tend to have this perception of doctors. If you're a doctor, you know everything about health or the medical matters. People have that perception of lawyers. It's not always the case. We have a very sort of diverse practice area that we deal with. So we have, I think, we're a little more adept at in facile at kind of pivoting and moving in from a labor issue to a zoning issue to a procurement issue to an open meeting law issue or an ethics issue. That's just what we do. With all that said, sometimes, if you might not have dealt with a specific topic or a subject matter for a while, you have to prepare yourself to advise the client about that issue. This happens in town meeting. There's a whole continuum of issues that we deal with. We have to be up on the law, and that requires constant attention. And we have to be proactive and not reactive, as you said, and understand that there are legal developments on all these issues all the time. We have to be familiar with them and bring them to your attention through things like trainings, client advisories. That's something we do routinely, and I think that's a critical function of municipal practice, because even as members of boards like this, you have to be facile in a lot of different areas, and so it's important to be kept abreast of developments in all these areas. So that's a major emphasis of mine, but I like to do it.
Peter's way too modest. Okay, he's one of the best lawyers I know, and I think, and I can say this with some confidence, that the service that Peter and others in my office provide, you'll be thankful, and I want you to for us to meet a year from now, should you decide to take us on, and I would guarantee that you'd be very happy with your choice in this case. And I would invite you to take a look at our references. make a phone call or two to any one of them. And I think you'll find the same information that I'm providing you today.
Right.
One of the best.
No, and I don't doubt that. My question, and that's why I was asking Peter, is he's our direct contact. And I've seen, in past, oftentimes we have an opinion where I feel like sometimes it's agreed with because it's with us. And my question more is in the confidence, would you say, listen, time out. I disagree with that opinion. And I think that that's something that I would look for, and not just somebody telling me what I want to hear.
I think we all have enough
To be blunt.
experience
Yeah, no,
And-
that's a great point.
and confidence to say to our clients, look, ultimately it's your decision, because it is ultimately your decision, not ours, but these are the consequences. And if you go down this path, we don't recommend it.
Thank you.
I don't have a problem saying that. I don't think none of us do.
Yeah.
That was my,
Part of our.
Right, that's our obligation.
Anyone else? No? Okay, let's go to the next one.
And I think if I could just add to that, I think that's where you can get into trouble as a municipal lawyer if you're tailoring your advice to convey what you think the recipient wants to hear. That's very dangerous, actually, because things change and things are fluid, and you don't want to be in a position where years later, when there's a different political will or a different preference or appetite, you're delivering advice that conflicts with or contradicts something you've advised on a similar or the same issue, years earlier, because it was a different political wind. So that's, you always have to formulate advice objectively.
perfect.
Very good. Mike, any more?
I just thought of a humorous analogy to a doctor that wants to please his patients and tells a guy he's okay. Go out and do something. The guy has a heart attack. It's kind of the same thing. Next question. What emerging areas of law do you see having the largest impact on municipal governments in Massachusetts over the next several years? And how do you propose to best prepare the town to deal with these emerging issues?
Do you mind if I
Sure,
jump off?
yeah.
So one of the things that I've seen in my practice has been the pushing the envelope on permitting marginal pieces of land for residential or commercial development because the value of real estate has gotten so sky high in Massachusetts, especially Eastern Massachusetts, and especially on the water. So there's a lot of conflict in that process between applicants and boards that has resulted in more litigation over permitting decisions, and neighbors very unhappy with bigger houses being put closer to them. So I think that really have to understand the permitting process in your town, your bylaws, understand the culture of your town, but be able to make solid legal recommendations regardless of that culture, but understand it when perhaps you're delivering the recommendation. And also then be able to step back and think about what are some of the big picture solutions here. There may be some changes you can make to your zoning bylaws or your permitting processes. There may not be, but that's been incredibly contentious, and I think will continue to be. They're just not making more land. Peter, David?
Yeah, I think that you just didn't respond to that question. What we've seen in the last year or 18 months, just the way towns have been forced to pivot with the way they communicate with their constituencies, the way they handle meetings. We're tonight engaged in a process that probably didn't exist less than 18 months ago. And I think it's really the future that, we will expect in the next, within the next year, maybe some additional conversion to this kind of practice, which obviously implicates what, we had for years and years understood open meeting law to be, is really about to change.
Anyone else?
No.
No. Okay. The town desires a hands-on council to work with departments and boards to address legal issues and would like to see a regular program of face-to-face office hours for town council at the town hall to meet and review issues. Do you think that is an advisable policy, both financially and otherwise? And how can your firm make it a success?
I personally very much advocate for that type of practice. As I mentioned earlier, it was a staple of our practice to hold town hall office hours on a regular basis. It gives us the opportunity to have the kind of face-to-face counseling opportunity, which is really what I think good lawyering is in real time. So I would welcome that opportunity if the town were willing to be able to do it. We obviously have protocols that we have to observe, but I, for one, think that that's a real win-win for practitioners and clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I concur, unequivocally. I think as ubiquitous as electronic communication has become, it can also be very efficient or inefficient rather. Efficient and inefficient, but it can be inefficient in the sense that somehow it's just this phenomenon of communicating through that means that things get lost in translation, and sometimes it's so easy to respond to a question that is different from the one that the person posing the question had in mind, and it's easy for two people for there to be a disconnect about what's actually being requested, what the purpose of the request is. And so I think to avoid all that, it's so often true that the best way to talk through these issues is over the phone or in person. Things are too easily lost in translation. So I think it actually, although on its face, it seems like it's something that would drive up cost, it actually has precisely the opposite effect in my experience.
I do it in Natick now, although I'm doing virtual this month. I do about twice a month office hours. I think it's really important to get to know and develop a relationship, not just with Mr. Reitnauer and Mr. Scott and department heads, but also the support staff as well, and everybody at town hall. You want to become a face because you are part of that team. And that really helps.
We do it in Attleboro right now, every week.
Anybody?
Well, my only question
Grace?
was related to the time charging, being distance away from your office. Do you charge travel time?
That again would be a negotiated item. And in this case, I can foresee that we could accommodate the town of Yarmouth without, having to charge travel time. I mean, obviously it's probably an hour from Quincy, but
Well,
think
I
that-
just bring it up because when you
no,
talk
it's a
about the
very
virtual meetings, I think that, to some extent, this pandemic has forced us into some things that actually are, having the interaction from people at home, as you said earlier, is great to have more people involved. So I find the Zoom much more efficient in terms of having to spend time in your car. So I guess that's where I was.
Yeah, no,
Kinda going-
I understand that, and we absolutely can make that work.
Mark?
I'm set.
Ian? I have one, I guess it's follow-up question. Assume COVID goes away, and I think that's remains to be seen, but would you advocate under those circumstances, if we didn't have these health issues and health precautions, doing these office hours on a remote basis or in person?
I think it's totally subject to the town's preference, and these things are all, nothing's necessarily etched in stone. I mean, if an arrangement was formulated whereby we were meeting in person, on a weekly or monthly basis, whatever it would be. And the thought evolved that it would be just as easy to do virtually. That's something that could easily be accommodated. I agree. Zoom it's interesting in a lot of ways. It's a better means of communicating. Not only, is it more efficient, you can actually see the person's face more clearly. And, you can pick up on cues that you wouldn't necessarily pick up on even from across the room. But it's totally subject to the town's preference. And I think it could be a fluid thing and something that could be adapted if, as the
Tracy, do you have another follow? No,
dictated.
that's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to go next now to Selectman Smith, who is on your screen, right over to the left here. Mr. Smith.
I apologize for not being there in person, but I got exposed to some COVID, so I don't want to take any chances with anybody. I've got a few questions. Mine are not as structured as some of the previous questions. First one has to do with Chapter 91 issues and other coastal issues. Erosion, accretion. Somebody said there's not building any new land. There is building some new land accretion. And also the town is looking to open some culverts up to make water flow better. And how would you handle these things, and environmental issues that also abut up against our neighboring towns, both the town of Barnstable and the town of Dennis, in particular if we open up additional culverts.
Sure. I'll take that one. So you're right. I didn't account for accretion, although I'm not sure that most of that land that you're accreting is buildable, but some of it is. I think that you have to understand what are the permitting issues and what are you trying to get out of the particular opening the culvert. And then I think you have to actually have conversations with your neighbors. If these are going to be actions that are going to cause impacts to your neighbors' water, to their discharge, you're going to have discussions with them, and you may have to enter into some sort of intermunicipal agreement. You may have to have some sort of negotiations to create the parameters for what it is you're trying to do. The Chapter 91 license issue, we've certainly worked with on a variety of them in Danvers and Cohasset. And again, that requires understanding the regulatory landscape, which can be fairly complex. And then being able to work with both your local conservation commission and also with DEP in the waterways folks. And I have worked with them on both permitting and enforcement issues on Chapter 91. And so I know who the right people to talk to, and I'm familiar with the regulations. And so that's one of those issues where you might have this come up and Peter might say, Karis, can you handle this particular project for me? And I would say, yes, I'd love to. This is the stuff that gets my juices going. Love the environmental land use water type work. I live on the ocean myself. So that's sort of my first cut.
My second question is, especially with us being on Zoom, open meeting issues. How have you handled open meeting issues? And have you come across any open meeting issues having to do with Zoom or any of these remote meetings that are being held? You earlier discussed issues with voting at town meeting, which I find very interesting, but it's kind of off the issue right now. But open meeting issues.
So again, I think that the move to remote meetings was new. Obviously, the concept that the Attorney General had approved went out the window with the pandemic, and the governor issued this order that said you can have a quorum by remote purposes, which was something completely different. So one of the things that we did in our office was actually not just go through what the regulatory steps were, but we actually created a checklist for board chairs. It was one of the things that I worked on that said these are sort of the best practices to think about when handling these remote meetings. And so that's the board perspective. And as you get more comfortable and more facile with it, you get more comfortable with running the meetings. But then you have the issues of, first of all, we had Zoom bombing, and you have to figure out what to do with that and how to keep your meetings secure. And I think some of that has been handled and thought through. The FBI actually was involved in a bunch of those issues. There's also the piece about how do you handle the increased number of people participating in the meetings, and more questions, and how do you handle those meetings? And frankly, in many of the communities I advise, the Board of Selectmen started meeting almost every week because the meetings would just take longer because there were more people involved, which is an incredible burden on you all. And so we had to figure out how to make these meetings more efficient, have them not last too long, and come up with reasonable interpretations of public participation under the open meeting law that were consistent with the guidance of the law, which we were able to do. And now they're mostly back to every other week meetings, because nobody wants to have to meet every single week when you're volunteers. So I think that there have been a lot of issues thrown at us because of the pandemic, and that we have worked with our clients. We've listened to what they want to accomplish, and what they want to make work and what isn't working for them, and then just work with them to try to figure it out. And I think we've done so successfully.
Yeah, and I again, open meeting law is another core component of a municipal lawyer's practice. We deal with it all the time. And one thing I like about the open meeting law actually is that I think the Division of Open Government has excellent resources. That one thing people don't, everyone's not aware of, is that they publish these monthly newsletters that get really into the weeds on issues that that we all face and struggle with, and I find them to be very, very helpful. I can't think of any concrete, exhilaratingly interesting open meeting law issues that have arisen around COVID and around the remote meeting format. I know early on, it would sometimes be the case that Zoom links had to change within hours of a meeting, or even sometimes on the fly. Perhaps the most interesting legal issue that's arisen around remote meetings, at least from my perspective, is that there are different rules that govern attendance at a subcommittee meeting by a member of the full committee that appointed the subcommittee. And there's a legal test that's applied to determine whether it's when it's acceptable and when it might constitute improper deliberations. And I had a conversation with someone from the Office of the Division of Open Government who said that because the way participants in a Zoom meeting appear on the screen, they're just panels. It can create confusion to a member of the public about whether the non-subcommittee member of the full committee is attending the meeting, or I guess the capacity in which they're attending the meeting. It can create confusion about that. So it's a little, it's a little bit more dangerous, if you will, to hold a subcommittee meeting via Zoom if members of the full committee are attending. That jumps to mind as an interesting legal issue that's exclusively unique to the virtual meeting format. But yeah, we deal with open meeting law issues all the time. It's almost a daily basis, actually.
My last question is, I know that you're going to provide us with well-reasoned and succinct legal interpretations, but what do you do with the town that ignores your advice? How do you handle that?
Well, if I could just respond briefly with that, it's not unusual for town council to come in conflict with strong-willed public officials who are convinced of their correctness. And as we said earlier, we're perfectly capable of defending the town where it requires to be defended, but also to provide candid advice to town officials where necessary. I personally believe that most town officials certainly do trust their lawyer's advice. And for the most part, your town officials are not necessarily interested in an appeals court brief every time they ask a question, but instead they're looking for straightforward, candid, solid and reasoned advice. And that's really where I think we can provide the best service to our clients.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Selectman Smith.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate your answers. And again, thank you very much for coming this evening. And that goes for Miss North and Mr. Mello and Mr. LaRocca. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask you if there are any board members that have any follow-up questions based on that last one.
Just one quick
Mr.
one.
Horgan.
I imagine you've had a little opportunity to look at our town. Anything that of note that you picked up that either are concerns or opportunities from a legal perspective that you might be able to help us with?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I know that the wastewater project is a great concern here, and I think it's a great opportunity for Peter to use the expertise that he has and experience that he has to assist the town in that regard. You're clearly a coastal community. With all of the concerns that come with being a coastal community. I know Karis has a lot of experience with the South Coast and the South Shore communities that we represent. Very similar issue. I think in general it's a great fit for us, and I hope for the town of Yarmouth as well.
Yeah, I took a look briefly at your charter just to get a sense of how you laid out your governance structure. And it actually seems pretty similar in many ways to the Natick Charter, which is pretty straightforward and seems to work pretty well. There may be a couple of questions that I had, which we can talk about in more detail if you decide to bring us back, but I thought it looked pretty straightforward to me. Also, I noticed, again, from my perspective, that you have a lot of waterway shellfish type specific regulations. I think that's probably a good idea given the setting, and that it's good that you have rules set up in advance to deal with a lot of these issues, because those are, again, other areas where there are conflicts between folks who want to go out and harvest and what you can actually do under the law. So nothing that screamed out at me from the time I was able to look.
Selectman Stone, did you have any final follow-up questions, comments?
Peter had me interested in a question. I wanted to just modify it a little bit. If you had to, there's cases of first impression. We all know what those are, right? There's very little guidance. Sometimes there's none. And you have to, the client's in a situation and they want to know, do we try to negotiate for this or for that? Do we just walk away from this because it's just too uncertain? Or do we go forward and litigate it? Fortunately, those cases don't come up all that much, but they do arise. And how would you, other than the obvious answer, gingerly, how would you address a case like that? And how would you present the risks and the uncertainty of that case to an executive board such as this one?
Well, from my perspective, that's an example of a situation in which I may prepare a more fulsome type of written document. I think in many cases it's most efficient and just as useful to respond to legal advice in a pithy email, for example, or 1 or 2 page memo. I mean, the reality is, this is just human nature. It's very difficult to read, 10 single space pages. A lot of judges don't even do it. And along those lines, you're well served to summarize your legal argument in the first 2 pages of any memorandum you file with a court for the same reasons. But in a situation like that, I think it serves everybody best to look at it from a few angles. First of all, obviously, you have to appraise the legal risks, and to the extent you can, try to assign a percentage likelihood of success if you can do that reliably based on cases that have been decided in the jurisdiction. If there are none, if it's truly a case of first impression, maybe you look outside the jurisdiction and look at how other state courts have dealt with analogous issues. But I think you also, a critical component of it is estimating, again, it's not an exact science, but what the costs associated with the legal dispute might be. It's easy to overlook that at the outset of a dispute or, any legal proceeding. But you have to give that careful thought, because sometimes you get into a proceeding and there's, you can't readily extricate yourself from it or do so in a cost-effective way. And you have to understand that there are costs associated with written discovery, depositions, motion practice, and legal proceedings, especially today, can be very protracted. Courts are backlogged. You, I think, have to the best of your abilities, try to quantify that and give the board or whatever authority is making the decision about how to proceed as full a picture as you can about the risks and what the practical effects are of their decision.
Could I just add, and I agree with everything that Peter said, what that comes down to is our experience. You look to us to give you advice. So there's two components to that, our experience, and this is something that we would probably very likely talk about amongst ourselves. And we will tell you, to a certain extent, our gut feeling based on our years of experience in advising. And that's also where, not to be repetitive, but the building the relationship comes, because we understand you and you understand us. And so you feel comfortable relying on the advice we give you when we say, there is no straightforward answer, but our gut says A and B and not C.
I have a very simple, at the risk of being sort of facetious about this, a formula that I use that I tell a client all the time. If I'm standing in front of a Superior Court judge, I want to be perfectly comfortable and confident in with the representation I'm making on behalf of a client. In your case, I'm not there yet. I need X, Y, or Z, and I'll be candid and tell my client exactly that. We're not in the business of just churning legal expenses. We want success, we want results, and that comes from being, certain about the course of action we want to take.
And sometimes it's, you also I think have to be copious about identifying all the potential options and avenues. It's not always an all or nothing proposition. In some instances, you may say, well, it's going to cost X to litigate this case, most likely. Your chances of success are probably X percent, and it's going to take likely this long to get there. Maybe as a compromise approach, you say, well, can we do a demand letter and see if that produces any or bears any fruit, or could we potentially mediate the case at the outset to in a more cost-effective way to avoid the cost of a fulsome protracted litigation, but try to get a resolution. So that I think you have to be comprehensive and try to identify as many pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages, risks, and options as you can.
Very good. Selectmen Post.
I was going to kind of follow up on Mike's thing, but it's just basically, I'm going to ask this instead. If any of you are familiar with any of the cases, I guess, that this board has been involved with in the past. Are you familiar with the lawsuit case that we had with the school district?
I personally am not. I'm not sure about you guys.
Yeah, I actually have not
Okay.
gotten as far as looking up
Okay.
what cases you've been involved in.
But you do have experience with regional school law.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
we'll leave it at that then.
All right. Anything else? Any final comments, questions from the board? Okay, well, on behalf of the board, I want to thank you all for being here. This has been a very stimulating and very, very helpful discussion. And we very much appreciate your interest in the town of Yarmouth. And regardless of how this goes, I feel that this has been incredibly beneficial and an enjoyable evening. So thank you so much for being here and your interest.
Thank you.
so much for the opportunity. It was lovely to meet you all.
Thank you.
Very
Lovely
good.
meeting you as well.
Thank you.
Could we get 5 hours more?
What I'd like to do next for the board is just take a brief recess for 5 minutes. Whether if there's any objection, then let's do that and be back. Thank
Nice to
you.
meet you. Thank you.
Do you remember the Bay Colony litigation?
Can you go make sure that we're on pause?
Sure. The town had a contract with the trash hauler. I think they were
Yep.
called Bay Colony. And, it said in the contract that they had to remove the trash from our no, landfill. How long does it take you to charge this to get it?
Probably an hour.
Oh, it's not bad. Not bad. I gotta get one of
And I
those.
can plug it into both.
Okay,
Yeah. And when I got this county job,
What's
they
this
ended
one
up
here?
getting another phone.
is this
That's what
just
I need.
another phone?
Yeah. That's for like business. This is for just about everything else. And then,
What's this thing on the back?
yeah, I do have three. It's a pain.
It's just a hold?
But you know what? It's rather than them all coming in to one, trust me, it helps manage.
No, thanks. I don't even want one.
Well, generally, I have times where they're off.
You have to.
Oh,
You
yeah,
gotta disconnect.
definitely.
It's a
Definitely.
lot.
All right, so we are back from our recess, and we've just finished interviewing our first candidate of providing legal services to the town of Yarmouth, and very shortly we'll be getting the next candidate. And here we go.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi.
Good evening. We're in regular meeting, so welcome. I hope you didn't break any speed limits on the way to Yarmouth.
No, it was good timing.
I'm glad it worked out. So for the folks at home, we have representatives from the law firm of Mead, Tallerman, and Costa. And they're a firm based in Newburyport, but they have offices in Millis, in New Bedford. They have been serving as counsel to the town of Yarmouth for a while now. And it's great to see you.
Nice to see you all.
Nice seeing
Procedurally, what we're going to do is I'm going to open things up. I'm going to ask you a basic question about introducing yourselves, although to some degree, we don't need much of an introduction, but I would use the time to maybe talk about some of the other things that you're doing with some of your other clients, municipal clients, your background as a firm and representing clients in other areas, and how some of that might be relevant and helpful to us tonight. But it's really also for the folks at home, gives them a chance
Sure.
to get to know you a little bit better. So feel free to use that time. When I am done, I'm going to turn it over to Selectman Post, then Selectman Horgan, Selectman Stone, and Selectman Smith, who's on our Zoom camera right there, so you can see him. So we're going to go around the board, and every member has a few questions that they'd like to ask, and we'll all chime in if there's a follow-up that we have.
Okay.
So once again, welcome. It's good to see you. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves and your firm's background and experience in providing general town council services to municipal clients. How much of your firm's workload is involved with this type of work. It's also an appropriate time to reflect a little bit on your service here in Yarmouth and where you see things going in the future, or where you'd like to see things going. And then, well, let me just stop right there. And once again, welcome.
Excellent, thanks. And Kate Federoff with me, newly named partner in the firm. We're thrilled to have her in that role. She's also the director of our labor and employment group, which is growing with additional attorneys along those lines as well. So I'll give you the brief history, because most of you know the history. We've been around since around 2004-ish. That was when Lisa Mead, one of my partners, former mayor of the city of Newburyport, started a municipal practice with one of our former partners, Mark Bobrowski. I joined in 2006. At the time, I was at Copeland and Page, now KP Law, and I left the partnership there around then because Lisa and I had kind of a different vision of what town council services could be. We wanted to provide mechanisms to allow us to be part of a team approach with our communities, the communities that would find benefit in that. We founded some economic models that would allow us to be on hand more and be available more, including some of the economic models that you currently enjoy as one of our client towns. Over the years, we honed that. We grew. We're 14 attorneys now. We've got 22 towns as town council. Some of them we now do the labor work for. Municipal practice makes up about 75 to 90% on any given day. But, you know, we closer to 90% than 75% municipal practice. In addition to our 23 or so town council clients, we're special counsel on individual projects ranging from general matters to land use matters to tax matters to all sorts of things like that. I'll let Kate talk a little bit about kind of our newest practice area, so to speak, about 5-6 years now in labor, and then I'll come back around to some of the benefit of what we'd like to do with our Yarmouth practice the same, and some things that, you know, we think we can improve on too.
So, hi, I'm Kate Federoff. I joined the firm, I don't know, five years ago? Yeah, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And prior to that, I worked for dog years. No. Prior to that, I worked for the city of Brockton. And Jay actually approached me, you know, and it was a big decision for me to leave the city. I really enjoyed working there. But part of the reason that prompted me to leave was that approach that the firm takes to lawyering for towns. And that's really an approach of one of teamwork. So constant communication, being involved in projects from the front end, so that the back end works out well without any flaws. So, and being in-house counsel, that's exactly what happened. People would come to you early with problems before they developed into bigger problems, right? And so that was part of the reason that I was attracted to this firm, because I really enjoy that approach. I think the results in the end are better. It creates good relationships, a lot of trust building, et cetera, et cetera. So with that in mind, and with that approach to law, I joined the firm and I started to capitalize on my experience that I had developed in the city of Brockton. So I did general counsel work, but I also headed up the labor practice there. So I did all union negotiations. I was part of the CFO, director of personnel, and I was the lead negotiator for all our union negotiations. I handled everything up at MCAD to you know, complaints in federal court. And I brought that to the table, and we started to capitalize on that first initially with some of our existing clients, helping them with labor and employment matters. And then it morphed into us growing the firm. And now we have, I want to say 10, 12, 14 labor clients. So the way I approach that kind of work is I recognize these are employees, and hopefully employees that you have for many, many years. You're not there to trick people or take advantage of people, but you're there to give sound advice to management as to how to handle problems, how to approach issues in a way that hopefully gets you to a positive result. Sometimes you have to do things that are not, you know, as positive. You have to take reactive measures. But my approach is to get in there quickly and give good advice on the front end so you don't have litigation or more expensive outcomes in the back end. And that morphs well with this firm. And I still do quite a bit of general counsel work. I've worked with you all a couple of times at a town meetings and on some other general municipal matters as well. So I still enjoy that kind of work as well. That's the one thing about municipal law that is really, in my mind, the most attractive part. It's the breadth of topics that you have to deal with. And that's the part we enjoy.
Yeah, and we're really, I mean, in a way, we're pretty geeky about this municipal law stuff. I'm the moderator in my town, and I've been on 5 or 6 other boards before I became the elected moderator. Brian Winter, another partner in the firm, was on several boards in Newton where he lives. Mike Kennebec, who's one of our chief litigators, who's done a bunch of work for you all, was a longtime zoning board member in his community. Lisa, obviously being the mayor. We like this stuff. It's, you know, I have a lot of law school classmates who don't like their practice. All of us, we like our practice. We enjoy it. We enjoy being part of the team. The flat fee arrangement that you all have taken advantage and other towns have taken advantage of allows us to be here without a fear of a bill going through the roof and do that. So kind of looking towards the future, some of the things that we look forward to is perhaps getting back to what we were doing pre-pandemic. You know, Bob came here during the pandemic, so it was hard to kind of return and see what we did on a more day-to-day basis. So I was coming down at least once a month to do office hours where I'd sit up in the conference room on the second floor and I'd spend half the day here going, talking with department heads, working with Kathy on zoning, working with Mark Rills, who I work with all the time anyway. But hey, here's some plans, where's an issue, occasionally do a site visit. I'd love to get back to that. It's been in suspended animation for a little bit. So that's something we're looking forward to as a firm. We're really excited about the opening of the New Bedford office. We have a labor lawyer that's going to be working out of there, helping our like Southeastern Mass clients, mainly all of our clients. But it's good to have another set of eyes, more perspective. It gives us more variety. It's a fully staffed 3.5 person. I'm there part-time and I'm at the other office part-time. So it's exciting to be able to serve. It helps serve our Cape clients, our South Coast clients, our South Shore clients really slightly better. So we're excited about that. And we're excited about the continued growth of the labor and employment practice. Again, a lot of towns like to keep those things separate. Some of our towns have taken advantage of it, which is why we've staffed it up that much more. And it's an exciting area of law, ever changing, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more later. So that's
Very good. Thank you. I'm going to turn the first round of questions over to Selectman Post.
Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight and for your continued interest in serving Yarmouth. This is a little bit more difficult because a lot of the questions we're going to ask, good counsel will tell us when you interview a candidate, you have to ask the same questions. So I'm going to follow along with that, although we are very familiar with a lot of the answers already. So can you describe your firm's experience with town meeting election issues, including drafting warrants, ballot questions, bylaws, and other forms, and in conducting town meetings and elections?
So I'll talk a bit about, Kate did some work, especially around the pandemic time, about some of the nitty gritty election stuff we get into. We consider ourselves at our best around town meeting time. Again, I'm a moderator, so I really like town meeting. I guess you'd have to really like it to do what I've been doing for more than a decade. But we really pride ourselves in it. Obviously, we've got 23 sets of town meetings a year with our clients, and we look forward to those, not just reviewing a warrant dryly and saying legal yes, legal no, but working on the bylaws that are going to be presented, helping towns understand the budgetary options that they have, working perhaps with a community preservation committee on some of the challenges around the legal aspects of that particular statute. So we really view it holistically. We think of it, I mean, it's the biggest event. If you're a municipal administrator, it's your biggest event of the year. And we want to make that happen smoothly. It doesn't always happen that way. There's always controversy, but we really pride ourselves in that, and right down to the parliamentary procedure, which I consider kind of my specialty, but everyone chips in. Kate does half a dozen a year. I do a whole bunch. Lisa, Adam, we have a number of people. There's no one specialist in the firm. I might be a little more expert in the parliamentary side, but all of our partners handle town meetings. We consider it our stock and trade. We think we're at our best when we're in those settings, helping prepare for and attend those town meetings.
Yeah, and I wish I could say I visited you more often on town meeting, but Jay and I split up that Saturday, so I get a different town meeting. But I will say town meeting was a newer thing to me. You dealt with the city council in the city of Brockton. So my first town meeting, let me say, trial by fire. It was really exciting. But now I really do love it. It is really, I think, more interesting to get a wider perspective than you get in cities, because you don't know the players when that person comes to the mic and asks you a question that you may not have anticipated. But like Jay, same thing. We review the warrants. We talk about things that we've dealt with during the year. Perhaps we should address them in this warrant. Have you thought about adding a bylaw to address the issue that we had 6 months earlier? So we try to keep a running tab. And we're really actively involved well before the day of town meeting. We don't just show up. There's a lot of preparation. Jay knows he'll call me a geek because I come in with my binder with all my preparatory notes and everything. So I can answer the questions in a really kind of thoughtful way that are posed, because sometimes the questions are really complicated and interesting. So there's a lot of background work before you get to town meeting, and then town meeting you just execute. 9 times out of 10 everything goes quite smoothly, and it is a big part of our practice that now I've grown to love.
And on elections, this has been kind of a crazy last year and a half on elections, because we were really pressed into service a lot more than we normally would. Town clerks are heroes when it comes to elections. The amount of stuff and the detail that they put together to take care of an election. But this year with COVID requirements, and we've gone to court for several towns to move election dates, we've had to work with the elections division that much more than we normally would to make sure that things are running smoothly. In the era of COVID, we've explored every last inch of the election laws to make sure that if you change something, how can you do that? Some of the other areas in elections that we've been involved in a lot historically and a lot recently, bunches of recall elections over the last couple of years. They can get very complicated. We've had some residency challenges, as the political seasons heat up, we see things like that, and we've had to deal with boards of registrars on that. Override questions are always a bit of a tussle. And when you link to those questions, all the ethics questions around them. So we represent primarily select boards, and when select boards often put things on the ballot in terms of an override, or at least are very involved in that, what you can say, what you can't say under campaign finance is a big question when these things come up. And we familiarized ourselves a lot with those. And there's always someone watching now, and everything's online. So you have to get it right. And most often we try and get it right beforehand. So we're being proactive rather than reactive. But in either format, we have to dodge and weave some of those persnickety questions.
Anybody want to ask?
Anybody have a follow-up question at all? Peter? Okay, let's move on.
Okay, my next question is, please describe your firm's experience in real estate issues such as property acquisition, sales, leasing, eminent domain proceedings, easements, and other property-related law.
So not only have Jay and I been involved with many types of those issues, eminent domains, particularly of roads, because oftentimes there's complicated titles. And so if you have an older road, you have to go through an eminent domain process, et cetera. Things like betterments, all of which require title work. 61A properties, right? When people are trying to opt out of 61A or the other sections which provide protection for certain types of parcels, whether or not the town wants to exercise a right of first refusal on any of those properties. What are your options? We've done many transactions on those lines. Also, we have a really robust real estate department, a group of attorneys who actually do the closings, prepare the deeds, record everything. Now everything's recorded online. So there doesn't, the in-person transaction requirement is less and less as we go on. But this is routine. It's done with all of our towns. Conservation Commission is oftentimes purchasing property to protect it, et cetera. So we're really well-versed in handling those types of transactions, and we've done it for the town of Yarmouth.
Yeah, and everything from the straight transactional stuff. We have 2 partner level full-time real estate attorneys. They have a little bit of a private practice too, but they're very dedicated to our municipal practice. So that stuff we handle routinely, the title work, the handling of the agreements, the closing checklists, making sure things go smoothly, communications with banks and getting all the signatures. That is the more the road stuff. It's where the things start to fall apart, where you really have to be on your toes. For the town of Chatham, about, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, they took a small piece of property, an easement across a small piece of property had happened to be property of the biggest taxpayer in town, Chatham Bars Inn. So you know it was going to be a battle. It spawned 3 sets of litigation, all of which we won eventually, but it was, it can be remarkable. We're talking about a 12,000 square foot easement, but you better be prepared. You better have checked all the boxes. So on the flip side to the transactional is when property disputes happen, boundary disputes, and you have to litigate some of those things. It brings in the litigation side, it brings in the negotiation side, the contracts, the settlement, the risk benefit analysis,
And
all of that.
And one other piece, I think the thing our firm does well is the lead counsel monitors all of these cases. So while we may assign it, so I'm lead counsel in one of our other towns, and I'm thinking of a transaction right now. I didn't write the deeds. I didn't do the town meeting vote. But the entire time I'm managing that with the lawyers in our office to ensure it's done timely and accurately, correctly, everyone's questions are being answered. And same holds true for litigation. So in that particular town that I'm thinking of, we have a case being handled by insurance counsel regarding a property nuisance. And I would go into the executive session with that insurance counsel and talk about the case and help advise the town, right? Because I have that relationship, whereas insurance company is a hired gun. Even our own litigation people, Mike Kennefick, I follow his litigation. So although I might not be the one running to court and getting a summary judgment, I'm ensuring that he's filing, or, I'm not monitoring him. He's a partner level, but, he's keeping me apprised. So I know what's going on. So when all the other moving pieces are going on around me, which I know about, I know what's going on with that case. So I think that's one way that our firm is a little bit different than perhaps other firms where you might just pass it off and not hear from the lead counsel for your town.
Very good. Any board members have a follow-up on that? Peter Q?
No questions on my end.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, my last question is going to be, please describe your firm's experience with zoning, subdivision law, including all regulatory aspects of land development.
So that was kind of our stock and trade before we got into the town council business around 2004-ish or so. Most everyone in the firm is very well versed in zoning and planning, conservation, and other land use disciplines. We're incredibly well known for that. We lecture about that. On any given day, we could be, any number of people in the firm could be drafting a zoning bylaw, heading out to a subdivision meeting, heading out to litigation over a wetlands case. I'd like to say, there's some good municipal practitioners out there and some very good municipal firms. I think our land use group is far and away the best in the entire Commonwealth and has been for years. Mark Bobrowski used to be our partner. He's kind of in a semi-retirement state with another firm, but we all worked together for a time. And he was obviously the dean of land use lawyers in Massachusetts. And when we started a firm way back when, that's what we were going to be. We were going to corner the market in land use. Now we evolved into something more than that, but we still think of ourselves as the go-tos for the municipal side. And we do a little bit of private side too, but when towns have complex problems, whether it's 40B, a subdivision, a zoning matter, we can fit the bill almost seamlessly in any of those disciplines, whether it's in the courtroom, before a board, at an office hours, fretting over a zoning bylaw or a new wetland regulation. And we think that we're as strong as there is in the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any follow-up questions? Now I'm going to turn the next group of questions over to Selectman Horgan.
Good evening, and thanks for being with us tonight. First question I have is, please describe your firm's experience with financial and procurement law and related issues, including construction procurement under MGL Chapter 149, Chapter 39.
So we have a substantial, I mean, as town council, you couldn't do work in this field without being well-versed in that. So we do have a kind of a procurement and contract group that consists of Lisa Mead, our other partner at the top of it, but Ben Taylor. We just hired an attorney from the city solicitor's office in New Bedford who has a ton of contract and procurement experience. So on the mechanics of contracts and procurement, we've got 3 attorneys that can handle anything. We've done a substantial amount of procurement work on public construction stuff with your DPW, working through problems. But that's not where it begins and ends. We also just on straight financial stuff, there's the huge amount of municipal finance statutes out there that we provide advice on a daily basis that myself and Kate are more equipped to do before we turn it over to contract people on the various kinds of funds you can use, on the options that you can use for accounting for one problem or another. And that is kind of ongoing advice that everyone at a partner level in our firm knows how to handle and can handle. Yes, for the complex contracts, we do rely on our contract team. But for day-to-day financial advice on what kind of funds to use, where you might look for this, basic contract review, quick things in terms of risks and liability. I mean, Bob and I dealt with a quick contract today, not a big financial matter, but we have to make sure you have the financial terms right in terms of where the liabilities could lie. So, I kind of see that as kind of a split in terms of the responsibilities. We do have a contract team that's well-versed in all the procurement laws and has the best of our contracts. The other thing, and Lisa would be mad at me if I didn't bring it up, is what she's pioneered, and I think it's a really great tool, is a set of standard contracts for towns to use. And so that when you go out to bid on something, you don't wait for them to attach their contract, which we then have to chew up. We give them as part of our procurement to that goes out with the bids, the contract. And it's the same every time. We have them for different kinds of services and in different amounts, and they can be customized, but it provides for predictability, it provides for expediency, and it makes sure that you are always going to have the contract that most protects the municipality, rather than arguing with a contractor and trying to win a few concessions. So everyone goes into a particular procurement with eyes wide open as to what contract they're going to be using, and it's ours. So.
And then on the back end too, are challenges, right? So Mike Kennefick from our office has dealt routinely and successfully with the IG's office on challenges to a bid award, challenges to change orders and things of that nature, you know, because you do have some contractors that underbid and then they just will try to hit you with change orders, change orders, change orders. And we've been successful in protecting the towns that we represent on those types of litigation, pieces of litigation.
That's great.
Follow up?
Any follow-ups, Tracy? No? No, I don't.
Okay. Does your firm propose to assign a single attorney to cover the range of legal issues facing our town? Will a team of attorneys be used to cover our needs? If a team is employed, will the work be split up by subject matter or availability? And how will the process be managed by your firm?
So you all know a little bit about how we work already. I'm the prime contact, but as the town administrator and the select board get to know all the other attorneys in the firm, they can reach out directly to them on their areas of particular expertise. I talked about the contract things. Kate will occasionally, or certainly when Dan Knappich was around, got some calls on some labor-oriented matters, our contract group, our litigation group. So while, as Kate suggested a few minutes ago, I'm going to always know what's going on and act as the person who is perhaps conveying the information, we have other specialists within the firm, but we think it's vitally important to have a primary contact and usually a direct immediate backup. You know, one of the great things about our firm too is that we're very partner driven. You know, there is one lawyer here who could probably nod his head a little bit, but the way law firms really make money is when associates do the work. When you have a bunch of lesser paid people, because you make the profit margin is that much higher. So when they're working a ton, it's good for the firm. Because we charge flat fees to most of our municipal clients, it doesn't matter that associates may be doing the work. We have as many partners as associates, and we'd like to make sure that it's the people you see are the partners, the people with the most experience. So that's your prime contact, your secondary contact, Lisa on contracts, Mike on litigation. Mike's a partner. Brian has been doing a lot of wetlands work and Board of Health work with you all. He's a partner, and we'll have associates fill in there, but your contact umbrella is going to be me or Kate, followed by the senior people in the firm that will handle things that might require a little more expertise.
Any follow-up? Anyone? Go right ahead.
And finally, how do you propose to interact with the town administration to organize and coordinate the process of fielding, responding to requests for legal assistance, and for managing the communication to ensure timely responses and to control the flow of requests?
Yeah. So every town is different in this respect. And I will tell you the form of communication, I have all forms. I have text messages on my cell phone to email to emergency phone calls because sometimes things won't wait, especially in the labor and employment context, because usually it's like we have the situation now and there's a really bad problem. So you need to have immediate contact. But in order, it's less important for the flat fee clients to control costs, but still that is all factored in. But generally, requests are funneled through the town administrator unless it's an ongoing project. And then we'd obviously coordinate with planning or building or conservation once that initial contact has been made through the town administrator. But in terms of actual communication, like I said, some things can be dealt with in much easier in a 30-second phone call because it might be a posting question, for example, right? We have a meeting that we have to post for and we've got to do it by 3 o'clock today. I'll call you up and I'll tell you how to post it. Or you shoot me a text, same thing. We have an emergency, give me a ring. Or an email, something a little more comprehensive. But then we even have communications where sometimes you need a public facing document, so you'll need a more thorough analysis. So we'd come prepared with a full memo, legal citations, everything to really fully advise the board that they can sit chew on, and then we'll have a face-to-face discussion about it at a meeting. So we encourage communication. I think it's our model to say, to again, not be fearful to call town council because it's going to cost us money. But instead, it costs you much less money when you deal with things from the front end with the appropriate legal advice. And it can take any form from casual to really a more formal response.
Yeah, and following up on that a little bit too, it used to be for all these other means of communication that every single answer to every single legal question ended up on letterhead. I think clients are traveling at the same speed that we're traveling at now. And if you took the time to do that every time, nothing would ever get done. So we will ask if a formal opinion is needed or required for whatever reason. And if not, we give prompt responses in varying, with the requisite amount of formality, so to speak, for the particular circumstance, knowing if it's going to be a very public document or it's going to a whole board or just to Bob, where I can be, yup, nope, I mean, it can really take the form of, take all kinds of forms. And we know that that's what today's legal environment demands. And that's what we provide. We can get as formal as you want, but we also know that people need answers quickly. And to that end, we're not perfect, but we try and get back immediately. I have a running dialogue on any given week with Mark Grills. I always try and copy Bob on it so he knows who I'm talking to, so he's not surprised when, wow, 17 different things going on with Mark Grills. But Mark needs things quickly when he's dealing with live building permits. And I try, even if I have to say, I'm going to get back to you in an hour. So on I think it was Thursday, I was flying out of town for a few days on the West Coast, and he had something he really needed to get done. Not life or death, but it was on his desk and he needed to get it out. I said, give me a few minutes, got to my hotel room, checked the zoning bylaws, got back to him with enough of an opinion that gave him confidence. And that's what clients, whether it's what clients demand now or what clients want, it doesn't matter. We were municipal officials too. You want an answer, and we pride ourselves in getting it to you quickly.
Anybody have any follow-ups? I have one. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You go first.
I'm curious, how many other communities, Jay, are you also sort of the lead? And like the arrangement is in Yarmouth.
So
What's the portfolio of communities? Because you're representing a lot of municipalities.
True. And that thankfully Kate came along because she has helped lighten the load. It is hard. It's a great question. How much can you handle? Now, I've seen a lot of my practice. I'm a litigator and I've done some litigation for Yarmouth, but I used to litigate. I was in court 3-4 times a week. As my practice has evolved, I am more now a primary contact, and we have other litigators. I still do litigate. I have a robust appellate practice more than a day-to-day courtroom practice, but I still do. But more of my job as I've gotten older is to deal with that executive level contact. That said, it can be difficult to manage. And through just the passage of time and the confidence that our clients have in Kate or Brian or Mike, who are our 3 newest partners, it's allowed me to lighten that load a little bit. So, and it happens kind of organically where Kate's the number 2 in a bunch of communities. They're confident in her. So we might split the duties, and in one town, she's taken it over, and that's great for the town. It's great for the firm. So we're cognizant of what kind of bandwidth we have. That said, when I was at KP Law, and this is not a slight on them at all, because I have still a lot of friends there, and it's a very good firm. I was a billing 2,400 hours a year guy, and I didn't have a life. And when we started this firm, Lisa and I, we are determined to make sure that our attorneys have lives. So even though we are demanding, as a firm. And even though we all work hard, we have a lower billable minimum. We make sure that people have time for their kids and get time out of the office, and I'm no exception. So we have designed our workload, and we hire more people as we've done this year when the workload goes up, because we don't want someone to burn out and we don't want someone to miss something for a client town.
And I think the way we approach things, we're not competitive with one another. So there are really busy times for me. So there was a moment this fall where it was very, very busy I had multiple negotiations that I was trying to settle before town meeting, et cetera, et cetera. I just turned to someone else and say, I need help. And I've never once been told no. Everyone picks up and helps each other. And it's really actually quite positive, because we are all really familiar with our busy lives. I've got 3 kids. Brian has 2 kids. Mike has 3 kids. We have a lot to do in our lives. So in that way, it's really, I think, a positive result for the client, because there isn't a delay, because we're not afraid to say to another person, you're really competent in this area. I feel comfortable with you jumping in, and they'll jump in right away. Because that's the important piece, right? To make sure that you get a timely response to your question, because if you get it a week late, well, then it wasn't worth it, right? I mean, it didn't help anybody. So in that way, I think the firm is really gives a positive result to the clients, because we work so well together with one another.
So the answer is,
How many towns?
yeah,
I guess in name only, probably 7 or 8. But in reality, probably only 5 or so. And some of them very small communities. But less of a workload than I had when I was a partner at the other municipal firm, by design.
thank you. Selectman Stone.
Thank you. The town is facing a major public infrastructure project for the development of wastewater treatment to protect the water quality in our coastal embayments and sole source aquifer, which you are very familiar with. What do you feel the role of town council can be in managing the legal issues involved in the planning and implementation of a massive public works project such as this? And how do you propose to become a valued member of the town's team to complete this project?
That's
If you are alive when it is completed.
yeah. That's a many-tiered
That is.
question that requires a many-tiered answer, but I'll give it a shot. This is a project like that, and we know a little bit about projects like that for not only Yarmouth, but our other coastal communities. Puts together a need for a lot of expertise in a lot of different areas. So you'll have significant contract issues once the project starts to get realized and you bring contracts on. So our whole public construction team, headed by Lisa, would probably be involved heavily. Those are big contracts. There are going to be significant town meeting votes likely on land acquisitions, whether they're voluntary acquisitions or takings. There could be roadway takings, there could be easements, there could be out and out eminent domain. That's a whole other discipline unto itself that requires discipline around town meeting, but also requires working with the appraisers and other people. There's certainly a legal overlay with that. As is the case with a lot of infrastructure projects on the Cape and elsewhere, there's undoubtedly going to be an IMA in there, an intermunicipal agreement somewhere along the way. We've dealt with a couple of those here on some wastewater issues. We've done a ton of IMA work for our other communities, especially around big infrastructure projects. There's going to be litigation. That's what these big projects spawn sometimes. Some of it is just threats of stuff that go away. It could be litigation with contractors. It could be litigation with landowners, but you have to assume it's going to happen. which means someone like our partner, Mike Kennefack, who is our construction litigation expert, although I do a fair bit of it too, is going to have to be in on it from the ground up. So we get this, a project like this requires the whole team. There'll be some financial decisions to make as to how you're going to pay for it, not only from from the construction side, but the ongoing user fees. So do you do betterments? Do you tax the whole community? I did a bunch of infrastructure projects in Chatham, and for some, they felt it was appropriate to do betterments, and others, they taxed the whole community. Those are tough policy decisions for a select board to make. And we try and give the pluses and minuses of it and what we've seen in the benefit of our experience. On a go forward basis, how are you going to do the accounting for it? Are you going to do enterprise fund accounting once you get this facility up and running? Are you going to do it in a slightly different way? Are you going to perhaps get some special acts? Who's going to manage it? Is it going to be an elected board of sewer commissioners? Is it going to be the select board acting as sewer commissioners or otherwise? So this one really touches, you got to really be a kind of a 5-tool player. And I think that the firm is pretty equipped to handle all those. And the whole team for a project of that size and scope would probably be active. And I think experience shows even on the smaller scale for Yarmouth, we have engaged many people, many of the partners on these things, from litigation to the contract drafting to the town meeting side and otherwise.
Any follow-up by anybody? No? Okay. Go on to the next one then. What emerging areas of law do you see having the largest impact on municipal governments in Massachusetts over the next several years? And how do you propose to best prepare the town to deal with these issues?
So municipal law is constantly evolving, right? I mean, I was just looking at a client memo that we did, townwide submission, multi-townwide submission, just on changes to the open meeting law. So it was a judicial decision that altered to some extent how boards could deal with the open meeting law. So it's constantly staying on top of even the most mundane, right? But there are major issues coming up, like marijuana was recently, I'm actually the marijuana lawyer for the firm. Marijuana was a huge issue, and it continues to be huge for those communities who have opted in and allowed marijuana in their communities. We have legislation that we're following, loads and loads of legislation being proposed on how to address host community agreements, et cetera. So while you're negotiating these host community agreements, you have to stay up and in front of that legislation to ensure that you're compliant in your contract with these vendors. So new areas I see, actually big ones on the labor front. Obviously, the post, it's a really big issue because of the way the state funded it. It probably will be delayed, but it's certainly at the forefront of our minds in terms of negotiations. Dealing with the pandemic, we expected there to be an end sooner than it is now. So we're still constantly dealing with the pandemic. You have to deal with impact bargaining with your unionized employees in certain changes that you make, whether it be face masks or vaccine mandates. Dealing with the pandemic during the election. It's old hat to the town clerks, but you still have to deal with the health issue and folks and ensuring that they're, safe when they're going out to vote or joining your town meeting, et cetera, et cetera. The open meeting law, because of the pandemic, I imagine is going to undergo some significant changes because Zoom was a positive experience for a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't have necessarily attended your local meetings, right? It gave a different kind of access than you had before because it was so easy. You might not want to drive down to Yarmouth Town Hall, but you know, item number 7 is of interest, so you'll have it in the background while you're cooking dinner. And when item number 7 comes on, you'll participate. So that's changed things for folks, and I expect legislative changes to follow to try to capitalize on that access. So those are some of the things that I see.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic has really changed a ton of things, and we're not going back. There's no way that we go back to the way the open meeting law was. There's going to be a continuing evolution should this pandemic ever end. I think its footprint on municipal governance is going to really alter the way we do business for a while. You know, I think of some kind of micro emerging issues, especially for coastal communities, is how do we deal with climate change? And it not only is it the climate change itself, which has a physical impact to communities with rising seawater and dealing with the pressures of extra heat and all of that. That's a significant burden unto itself. But the regulatory network that we're seeing emerging from state houses, from our state house, that people are requiring compliance with through MEPA is going to have a lasting impact on how bigger projects are done, or even smaller projects. It's an additional, I don't want to call it a burden, but it is an additional layer of regulation that we're all going to have to deal with in an exponentially increasingly amount over the next few years. Whether it comes down from the federal government, which we see a lot, or the state government. There'll be some positive things for us to deal with, perhaps some funding streams that'll help us do some things, but there's going to be a lot to deal with. So we talk about this big public works project. There's going to be impacts from new regulation that weren't even on anyone's radar 5 years ago.
Yeah, on the NIPD's front, so your discharge permit that you have for wastewater treatment plants, emerging contaminants, right? That's what's being examined right now. And it's especially important for coastal communities or communities that rely on wells, to how you can discharge your treated effluent. That's another issue. Lots of stuff.
I have a follow-up question, if that's okay. I'm glad you mentioned climate change. And because one of the things that we're seeing is that Mother Nature is engaged in some activities that we've never really been prepared for. Flooding, rain events. In some cases, the events themselves exceed the design capacity of the facilities that we've created to deal with this. For example, stormwater treatment, right? And a concern that I have, and I'm just curious what your reaction is that when municipalities build these systems, they're for certain circumstances and design standards that in some cases, standards that and requirements, conditions that no longer exist. Does that become potentially a liability issue for a municipality?
Massive. I'll give you a great example. I was special counsel to the town of Situate, where I've done a bunch of special counsel work over the years since even after I left KP. We had a situation where they had it was brand new, beautiful wastewater treatment plant. They changed in the span of a month the requirements regarding copper in wastewater. And they said, okay, you are not, and then we were running up against our 5-year, because you got to renew these permits every 5 years, said you're no longer compliant and your infrastructure won't handle it. It's not like you just slide a new filter in. The town, we litigated it, we sought legislative help from our legislative contingent and delegation, to no avail, the ending result of which was a multi-million-dollar liability that the select board had no choice at the end of the day, after fighting over it for a couple of years, was to go back to town meeting and just appropriate more money. So we're now trying to predict when these projects come along, when we hire engineers, where is this going to be? How redundant do we have to design these things so that we're not going to spend $25 million on a wastewater treatment plant or whatever it costs and have to spend another 25 million to retrofit it in a few years?
Or the cost of negotiating in a regulatory environment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate
It is really daunting. None of us know the future with this. We can see trends. And that's some unknowns, but like you said, there's some known knowns. We know that there's a shifting shoreline. Chatham is like ground zero around Monomoy for shifting shoreline that is related in some part to climate change. When that happened, when I was town council there, the federal government said, well, we own it now.
Yeah.
And we said, no. And then they barred all of our fishermen who had been there for 200 years. And we had to, again, go through the same song and dance there, but they lost properties along the shoreline and some other people gained property. And how does that, how do you prepare for that? How do you deal with that? What is the routine you go through when these things happen?
Thank you. Anybody else have any follow-ups on that last question? No? Okay, Mike, back to you for question number 10.
The town desires a hands-on council to work with departments and boards to address legal issues and would like to see a regular program of face-to-face office hours for town council at the town hall to meet and review issues. Do you think that this is an advisable policy for the town financially and otherwise? And how can your firm make it a success?
You know, Mike doesn't normally throw softballs at me, but I'm thanking him for that one. You know, this was when we started doing office hours. I think the first town we recommended office hours for was maybe the town of Bellingham or Ashland around 2006 or so. And it's just been a winner all the way. And people, our competitors said, you guys are crazy. You're going to spend 4 hours plus the travel time there, and your hourlies are going to be in the toilet. So from both a client approach as well as a law firm management approach, it's a huge winner though. So because the amount of work we can do, and I again look forward to getting back to doing it here, for a simple face-to-face meeting is so much more than I could do through a series of texts and emails, because you're really right there. It's really helpful to be able to provide that service. When we do that, as Kate was mentioning earlier, we head off problems at the pass. I could sit down with Karen or Kathy or Mark and issue spot something, or Kelly, and really issue spot something before it becomes a problem, which means they can work it out in a better way. And then there's no litigation at the end of the day because people have an understanding of what the end result is. Well, it happens, especially when you bill on a flat fee basis, that when there's less litigation, there's less amount of legal effort. The single biggest suck of time for a lawyer is litigation. It's hours upon hours to prepare for anything. So when we help towns avoid litigation, A, they're avoiding litigation, which is awesome. And B, we're avoiding litigation. So we're doing what we do best, which is give advice. We'd like to think we're really good at litigation too, but it's actually turns out it's a good business model, which I'm not sure our competitors still agree with us in this whole kind of evolution of the fee agreement that we work with. But it's been a winner. Litigation has gone down in every single town where we have a flat fee, down to completely manageable, usually a few zoning cases here and there, and occasionally some other kind of small case. But it has litigation drops when we do things like office hours or work to avoid problems rather than to react to them.
I think it also really builds those relationships as well. So there's that trust element. So when I was at the city of Brockton, it wasn't go down to the solicitor's office and get a legal opinion. It was go get Kate and bring her up here. because we've got this issue that's blowing up, and you would run upstairs and work to fix it. And that face-to-face communication really helped with that, but it was because we already had that relationship. So everyone felt comfortable going down to Kate's office. It wasn't going down to the solicitor's office. It was coming down to my office. And the same thing that we've seen develop with our towns, that again, it's not calling in the lawyers, which is the dreaded task that you see in some communities, like, oh geez, well, we don't want to bother the lawyers with that. Why not? That's what we're here for. So when you have that face-to-face interaction on a routine basis with all staff, then they feel comfortable saying to the town administrator, hey, do you mind if I run this by Kate and see if that's kosher? And in that way, it again leads to less litigation because people brought the problem to you, as opposed to saying, we can handle it, we can manage it ourselves, because it seems much bigger when you bring it to the lawyers. So in that way, I think it's also very positive.
We set?
Anyone have a
Anybody
final
else?
question?
Okay, let's
I have one.
go right ahead.
So aside from the benefit to the town, what do you feel the benefit is to your firm in terms of your efficiency and your cost controls, and once we get COVID under better control, going back to the office hours model?
So again, the flat fee makes it so there's no difference. I mean, yes, is it more hours spent on the road going to a community and hours or lawyer stock and trade? Sure, on some respects, but the amount of hours we save on the back end in terms of reacting to problems is much more time consuming for us and panic inducing and consuming for a community. So from our perspective, it's just smart business. Again, going with a flat fee has been remarkably successful in general for towns that are conscious of costs. No town that we represent in this capacity gets to March and says, we ran out of legal budget. Don't anyone call the lawyer. That just doesn't happen. And problems happen in March and April and May. It's towards the end of your fiscal year. It's your busiest time of the year. So it's really important that you guys pay the same amount every month. It's also really good for Mrs. Tallerman that she gets the same amount in every month too. But it really works for the towns. It works for us as a business model. Once we have enough communities that have bought into this really good approach to it, it tends to average things out. So let's say, for example, we're in a period of heavy litigation. I have something coming to trial for you all. We don't have too many trials because we settle most cases. If I have a trial in a month for the town of Yarmouth, my effective hourly rate is terrible, because you spend, Mike, you know what it's like when you're preparing for trial. It's every waking hour that you spend thinking about every possible contingency.
You don't have a life until it's over.
That's right. So my effective hourly rate, or the firm's effective hourly rate for that month, could drop to like $50 an hour for a month. In the same token, some other town had an easy month, and my effective hourly rate there is $300 an hour because they didn't have any litigation. It wasn't a town meeting month. Everything was running smoothly. Every town also has December and August, which are in light billing months. So some months the bear eats us. Town meeting, our effective hourly rate in the month of May is awful, but you catch up and the model works. The revenue picture works. Clients love it. I mean, it's not for every kind of client. It's not for every kind of town either. But the towns that have grabbed onto it and understood the benefit for them of getting answers, building those relationships, as Kate said, you know, I know Bob a little, I don't know him that great. It'd be great to spend a couple hours once a month, not on the phone, where we're, you know, talking things over in the conference room up there. That's where Kathy Williams and I have done some of our best work, and Karen Green and I, where people can drop in. Jeff Colby comes by. We do stuff. Incredible value to that in building those relationships and that confidence in each other. And for us, we're not the richest folks in the world. We don't charge Boston rates or anything like that. We're doing okay.
The other tack of that too is it's a relief for the lawyers, because the breadth of things that we have to deal with is so vast that there's almost every day a question that comes up and I say, geez, I really don't know the answer to that. And I have to take time and figure it out. And it's not a moment where I question myself of, Kate, you've got to get this done quickly because this gets billed out to the client. If I need to take time and be thoughtful about it, I will take that time. I will engage in a little more research than if I were billing out at X dollars per hour and feeling, maybe that's me, I've got a guilt issue, but feeling guilty about that. We're quite efficient because all of us have quite a bit of experience, but there are inevitably really unique issues because we're not a personal injury firm where we've seen that exact car accident 150 times in the past year. We deal with very unique issues, from infrastructure, from labor, to employment, to finance, to all of the things that we discussed about tonight. So inevitably, every day I come across a question and I say, I'm really going to have to think about that. And we don't fret over thinking about it. And we're just thrilled that we can take the time and give you a really thoughtful, thorough answer. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And from experience, I know exactly what you're
Any
saying. And anybody that tells you they have all the answers to all the questions all the time, you don't want to hire them because they're not being truthful.
Yeah.
And it does take sometimes a lot of effort to investigate and research a problem. And if you're not under a lot of billable pressure, you can do a better job for the client.
Yeah.
It's an interesting observation. Thank you.
Very good. I'm going to go to Selectman Smith now, put him on the hot seat with his questions.
I apologize for not being there in person, but I got run into somebody who had COVID. So I figured it's best not to be there. I have got a couple of questions. First one is on Chapter 91. Issues with Chapter 91, erosion, accretion, dredging. What do you do with the spoils? And also the town is looking at possibly opening some culverts up to improve the flow in some of our rivers and embayments. Any thoughts on those items?
So the ins and outs of Chapter 91 would probably be more Lisa's expertise. Certainly, these are evolving issues going back to kind of the climate change and the changing landscape from the approach with environmental matters that we're seeing, especially in rural or coastal communities. We're seeing these questions more and more. I did become a little bit of an accretion expert in Chatham and the law and requirements and the cases and how those matters get litigated. So from that standpoint, the basic land use tenets of that, we're pretty familiar. There's also local wetland permitting in any kind of removal of culverts in addition to Chapter 91 type of issues that we get involved in pretty routinely. Those are serious policy questions. There are some unique state level regulations regarding that. Sometimes culverts that work around a dam, there's a different state agencies getting involved. So there's a lot of elements that factor into that. Getting rid of the spoils, as you suggest, it depends what they are and what's out there in the industry and who can take them and who can't take them, and the regulations surrounding that. Again, probably rely more on Lisa, who's been our Chapter 91, having spent most of her life in Newburyport. She's got a significant amount of experience on some of that state level coastal regulation, but we've certainly dealt with a fair bit of the issues regarding changing policies regarding coastal issues. I've again done a ton around Monomoy with respect to accretion issues, as well as the harbor itself up there. So it's a pretty varied set of regulations that we'd have to deal with, but that's how we'd approach it.
My next question has to do, and you've already touched on some of these things earlier on open meeting and issues with open meeting, obviously open meeting issues, and with elections and how do you control this with everything on Zoom or similar?
So, and I'll let Kate chime in here too. Zoom has been a struggle. It hasn't, it's amazing how far we've come with it in terms of having controls. The Division of Open Government certainly is struggling with it on a day-to-day basis. You know, I give open meeting law seminars. I did it before COVID. I'm doing it during COVID. And one thing I used to say to people more about emails than things like Zoom is that someone's going to violate the open meeting law with emails in this room. That's like kind of my opening line on the email section. And it's inevitable that there are violations regarding some of those kinds of issues. Zoom is a similar situation in that it is fraught. It's, even though the technology has advanced 100-fold since we all started using it, access for the public to Zoom is spawning a whole new line of open meeting law complaints. We're trying to get it right. It has been a bonus for tech professionals who can assist a town in making sure that they're on an efficient, usable database, but it's not easy. And my guess is we haven't seen the last of the state level regulations and statutory changes in it. And we certainly haven't seen the end of litigation. We are seeing even in zoning litigation, an additional claim regarding lack of access due to Zoom, or couldn't be heard, or raised my hand and no one recognized me. Things like that. It's super challenging for these land use hearings. And I know Kate handles a good chunk of our open meeting law complaints, so I'll let her chime in a little on that.
Yes, I am the lucky person that deals with most of our open meeting law complaints. I don't know exactly how I started that, but I am now. But I will say, so Zoom is a double-edged sword, right? So capitalizing on what Jay said, but in a different way, what I said earlier about it creating this whole avenue of access and in a way that really people and residents appreciated, it also created access to complainants. So there are several people that they're not residents of the town, and they'll search for open meeting law violations. And they can range from, they didn't have their nameplates on their little Zoom boxes, so I didn't know who was the select board, right? To other things like access, like Jay was speaking about. But I've seen an uptick on open meeting law complaints that you have to respond to. So that's actually the negative of Zoom that I see, except for with training and with experience, we are going to be able to react to these so we don't violate, right? So even there aren't any innocent mistakes that may happen either with technology or just by error or not knowing the law, because all of you or some of you are not lawyers, and you're not reading open meeting law cases every day like we are. So inevitably there are going to be some innocent errors that happen. But like Jay said, I've done open meeting law trainings too. And part of our job as municipal lawyers is to train boards and commissions, which we do on a routine basis. So we like to schedule trainings and say on an annual basis, when you have a new slate of people on your boards and commissions, to ensure compliance. But I have seen an uptick, and we're trying to bring that back down by educating our clients.
And, we do offer 2 free training seminars a year to all of our communities. And usually what we do is a combo of open meeting law and public records, sometimes with ethics thrown in too. And we have a kind of a new section on how do you deal with some of the intricacies around Zoom. As Kate said, there's a lot more access now. So I just had a controversial hearing before the planning board in Holliston. They were considering a fulfillment center, essentially an Amazon warehouse, and it was close to a neighborhood. So there was going to be opposition. There always is on a big project like that. But formerly, where you would see maybe 50 people in a room, which would be a big showing for a public meeting for people to drag themselves out after dinner, we'd have like 300 people on a Zoom call.
Yeah.
The chairperson is one person, and they have to react to every raised hand or whatever technology you're using during a public hearing where you were required to give access. So it's become almost impossible in those contexts. So what do? Well, we try and look for those things, but towns have had to staff up. There has to be someone helping manage, essentially almost like on a walkie-talkie system. Hey, there's a raised hand on the 4th page of your Zoom. Scroll through and you can find it. And you have people who are busy. They don't have time to get training necessarily in how to manage a Zoom call. So it has added a new dynamic that we're trying to stay ahead of. Again, we're going to see, bless you,
Thank you.
we're going to see super big changes by the state in this. They're undoubtedly going to legitimize further this kind of remote participation model, but towns are going to have to adjust. And when you have a big project, if you have a hearing on zoning or something else for a big public works project like we talked about, there's going to be 300 people on the Zoom call. And every single one of them is going to be guaranteed a right to talk if they want. So.
Can I make a
Yes,
comment?
go right ahead.
I think Tracy was on the recent call with the Mass DOT regarding the replacement of the Bass River Bridge. I don't know who else in this room might have been on that call. I think they handled it remarkably well. They were recognizing people that raised their hands. Then they had another person who was reading email responses. And they seemed to accommodate everybody. I think there were, what were there, Tracy, about 3 people involved, 3 or 4. And there was lots of questions verbally through emails and other ways. And so I think, I know it can be done because I've seen it done, but I don't get me wrong, I know that there's probably a lot of tricks and pitfalls and things you have to avoid, and a lot of maybe a big educational piece to it too. But it was really interesting to see the dynamics. There were a lot of people that came into that hearing.
What was interesting though, it was a webinar. So
Yeah.
like in our meetings, you can see the participants, you can see the
You can't
hands,
see.
but
Yeah.
as a webinar, I couldn't see who
No,
else
but
was
they
there.
gave the names and,
Yeah.
and every email, and there were some people that emailed, I'm going to say a couple
Chat.
dozen times
It was a chat. Yeah.
as the flow was going. Is that what it was? Okay.
Yeah, they have the
And they would announce who it was and they would read it verbatim. There were a couple of anonymous chats or messages, and they would announce that this anonymous person asked this question. But I was very very impressed with how they handled that.
Which brings up a good question with that in terms of our procedure has always been a question about non-town related people, right? So when you have the Zoom, they do identify themselves, but we have no way of knowing or whether or not they are allowed to participate, should participate, if they have no, so to speak, standing in the town, when you're on a Zoom, if they raise their hand, how do you know? I mean, if you have 300 people, I'm sure at that Amazon scenario, I'm thinking in my head, half of those probably aren't even abutters or even, people in town. So for the chair, that's a difficult thing for him to make sure he gets to all of them. And some of them may not even be residents.
Right.
at all.
So, I mean, there's little bits of advice that you give, and it's not different than the advice we've given previously, but it takes on a new importance. So we have told chairs that if you get the same comment over and over again, you can ask for something new. It's not different than a town
A
meeting
meeting, yeah.
situation where we sometimes move people along, but how do you train a chair? Some chairs like to let people go and some chairs like to move things along. So you have to know your chair. And then you have to be able to give them advice saying like, can I tell that person that I've heard this already? So just little bits and pieces of open meeting law. And then you throw on weird issues that we've never seen before. And we've all seen this on Zoom where someone doesn't have their face, but an avatar that
Yeah,
actually says
yeah.
something about the issue, like anti-Amazon or something for this Amazon warehouse. And how do you deal with that? Is that okay? Is that part of the hearing? Is it distracting? Because there's evolving issues that we're not sure how they're going to filter out at the end of the day, but it is difficult. And then there's a side chat room, unless you turn it off, where people are chatting and other people are watching and listening to it. Is that part of the meeting? Where do the records go for these things? What do you save? What do you not save? Or it gets complicated. And we're all going through it at the same time. There are things that we can help with from a legal side. There's going to be a ton of trial and error on this over the next couple of
Judy, on a
years.
case like you just described, is it within the chair's discretion to limit commentary and input to residents of the town?
No,
It is not.
not in a public hearing.
They have to take it no matter if the
Yeah, no,
person's calling
but
from.
a chair could, however, say, well, we just heard, because you normally ask for your name and address. We just heard from, so this was the town of Holliston. It's the facility was in Holliston, but Medway was the next town over. So he heard from a couple of Medway neighbors, and it was appropriate. He asked me, can I ask if I can hear from someone from Holliston? I said, yeah. I mean, again, town meeting, kind of uber parliamentary procedure, but yes, not everyone, every person in that 300 list gets to say the same thing over and over again. And you can state a preference like, oh, I'd like to hear, is someone want to speak for the opposite position? I'd like to hear from them next. So please raise your hand if you're willing to do that. So yeah, there can be the ebb and flow, provided at the end of the day that you're not depriving someone from a truly unique comment. Does that mean your public hearing could go on for 7-8 months? Sure it does. But it's demanding more of our chairs. So we're doing more and more trainings to give chairs the confidence that they need to manage things in what was always a challenging environment for a chair, but now even more challenging.
And complicate it further, another issue that we've seen arise is the ACLU saying, well, in your public comment section of your public meetings, not even public hearings, but public meetings, has that created a public forum whereby you can't limit the discussion? And the ACLU has stepped in a couple of towns to give their opinion on that aspect, which was always viewed differently because under the open meeting law, the chair had discretion to control his or her meeting, right? And you had the ability to say when it was duplicative, or the ability to say when it was combative, or we just need to move on because this is item number 1 of 20 and we've already been here for 3 hours. So that further complicates things for municipalities as well.
Very good.
I have one more question, and I just wanted to let you know that I also have heartburn after listening to your thing on open meeting. Oof. You've provided, this is a scenario, you provided a well-reasoned, cogent, and succinct item to a town, and they choose to ignore your advice. How do you handle this?
So, hopefully we take advantage of the tools, and which is entirely up to the town, that allows them the freedom to make the decision that they want to make. And sometimes ignoring our advice, there can be a beneficial side to that. Sometimes it's not good. All we can do as lawyers is give our advice. So if it's something that's going to put the town in jeopardy in terms of liability, we'll be very clear about it. We can't always give great advice. We try and give it under threat of litigation or potential for litigation, give that advice as much as possible within the confines of an executive session. But sometimes an open session, it'll happen too, and we have to work around that. Sometimes we can work with just the town administrator and try and give advice, and then they have the ability to help assess that with a chair of a board or something. It's never comfortable, perhaps, when someone says we want to go another way, but sometimes a town does want to go another way. And in that case, if they choose to, and it ends up being a piece of litigation, we're duty bound to be, I can't file a frivolous piece of litigation, but if it's a 60-40 or 70-30 question and they want to take the 30, I'm going to fight like crazy to get them the 30. And if I can't get a full win, I'll try and get an awesome settlement or something. If it's a 0%, my ethical requirements to the bar won't let me do something like that, but they're very seldom 0% items. But let me give a potentially beneficial side to that very same question. Sometimes, and let's put this in the context of a land use board. Let's say, and again, we're a flat fee town here, so you don't pay for land use litigation either. It's not just the advice. You don't pay for land use litigation if a zoning matter goes to court. So let's say it's Chapter 40B, land use, which towns lose those cases. It's just, or Dover Amendment cases, you lose. It's not a favorable statute. Let's say a board really wants to deny or sharply condition a project that has one of those broad-based exceptions under the law. They can do so, if there's a principle involved in it, wrong spot for that project. We know the statute's hard, it's close to an environmental resource, we can in good conscience say yes, or we think it's going to dump too much traffic in that neighborhood or use up some sewer capacity that we were saving for another neighborhood. So the zoning board says, we want to say no. And they ask me to assess it. And my answer would probably be not a great case, not a 0% case, but we lose a lot of those cases. We end up settling most, but we lose a lot of those. Here is where that flat fee really helps. Because a lot of times a town that was facing a losing proposition would say, we're not going to do that because we're not going to spend $25,000 on litigation for something that we have a 60% chance of losing. We don't want to do that. But when you throw in the flat fee veneer over the top of it, it allows you sometimes to fight on your principles and to take a matter further than you might not otherwise go because you feel it's important to the citizens of Yarmouth. So again, using, there are great 40B projects, there are bad 40B projects, there are great Dover Amendment projects, there are crappy ones. But if you want to fight one, and we want to take the financial part of that equation out. So make a decision on what's best for the town from a policy standpoint. We'll give you the full picture. We're honest with it. There's been situations here in town where we've delivered news that the town didn't like. And sometimes we fought anyway, and sometimes we haven't. The good news is it was the same bill at the end of the month that you always get. So that's where we have kind of thought that through. Sometimes you have to fight. Sometimes fighting is a bad idea. You're going to get our straight advice either way. But we try and cushion it by allowing you to fight on principle where you feel you must.
For me, I also want to respond to that because I'll tell you, when clients call me, 99% of the time, they want to reject my advice because here's the scenario that I get routinely. Kate, we have to fire this person tomorrow. And I say, you can't do that. So they immediately want to ignore my advice. And sometimes then that's part of the process, right? We've built that relationship. So I say, okay, so tell me what's really going on. And we talk through that problem. And I talk about, well, what can we do to either correct your problem or eventually get to a situation where you've tried everything and then you have grounds for termination and then it's defensible. And usually we can get to a place where either we're doing corrective action, which can lead in sometimes to a really quality employee who just didn't know that he or she was messing up. Or you get to a place where you have grounds to get where you want to be. But there are some times where you're sitting in a situation and you say, I've got this issue, say it's with a union, contract interpretation, right? We have complete extreme opposite interpretations of that contract. And as lawyers, we tend to be risk averse, right? We want to limit liability. We want to reduce the risk of the town. And we'll say, okay, well, here are all the reasons why you may lose. And here are the two possibilities where you may win. Sometimes you go on those two because you have to engage in the battle, right? You have to say, no, I'm not going to concede that point. And you go in, and at that point, regardless of if you've given them privately 10 reasons why you think an arbitrator may side with the union or some other entity that you're disagreeing with, you still go in on those two and you fight hard to win, because we may be risk averse, but we also hate losing. It's the nature of the character of a lawyer, I think. So.
Just want to make one brief comment. So it's not just boards, but clients in general. They fail to appreciate the fact that when they tell you a scenario that you're relying on when you give legal advice, you're assuming those facts. You're assuming that the evidence, if you go to court, is going to come out that way. But a judge or a jury has the prerogative of believing some of the testimony of a witness, all of the testimony of a witness, or none of the testimony of the witness. And you as an attorney have no control over that.
It's true.
None, zero. So you're giving advice predicated on this is the way it is. And a judge or jury strips that foundation away from you on a credibility issue. And sometimes clients come back and say to the lawyer, I thought you told me I had a winner here. Well, you really didn't. You said, and that's why when lawyers give opinion letters, they recite the facts very carefully upon which that opinion is based. So, but it's tough. Everyone thinks the world's black and white, and it's not.
It's very gray.
Do we have any other questions from board members? Nope. No. Is there any final comments from you at all?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Peter, did you have?
Yeah, I'd like to thank Ms. Fedorov and Mr. Tallerman for coming in. Very much appreciated their comments and their answers to all the questions. Again, thank you very much.
No, obviously, we've enjoyed being here as council. The staff, the multiple members of the select board that I've worked with, the land use boards have all been terrific. You know, it's a client we take seriously and really honor and respect. We've been here for a while. We'd like to be here for a while longer.
Very good. Well, on behalf of the entire board, I want to thank you for being here, and this was quite enjoyable. And thank you for your service to the town of Yarmouth very much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And thanks for
Thank
being
you.
here. All right. With that in mind, we'll move on to our next item. Actually, before we go to the next item, which is to adjourn.
Not a bad agenda.
Yeah. What I'd like to do is just take a moment to just converse, since there was one other candidate that we did not hear from. Good night.
Good night.
I'm going to at least allow the town administrator to update us on what we know and any thoughts, recommendations regarding the other candidate for the position of legal counsel. or town council?
Well, it was quite late this afternoon. We did get a couple of phone calls. The first one was to alert us that, one of the key team members was actually positive for COVID and experiencing symptoms. And also other key members had close contacts. So they felt it was impossible, for them in good conscience to come down here. But I did offer to try to get them aboard for Zoom. And after conferring with the, members of their team that actually had symptoms, they felt that they couldn't pull that off. And they asked that if there was an alternate date that they could come down, and they didn't offer a date. But I mean, I'd certainly recommend you had the 3 finalists that you get the third one down at a convenient time and take a look at them. But that's really all we had. It all happened pretty quick this afternoon.
Any comments from board members on the recommendations?
Tracy has a comment.
I will. I have a comment. I always have a comment. Well, it's unfortunate. I'm very sympathetic with COVID. I think we've all had situations where, like Peter today, is home. And I respect that. And I want that to happen. I think that's the most appropriate thing to do. However, we coordinated this meeting tonight to have all of them here at the same time for a particular reason. I don't think it's fair now to allow them to watch this and then have our questions and be able to participate later. I have an issue with that. I also have an issue with the fact that this is a big firm with a lot of members. And when we need legal counsel, we need legal counsel. So I think that they should have been able to adapt and send somebody on their team. We weren't asking them to be here personally. As Mr. Rittenauer said, we asked them to participate via Zoom, and they couldn't find a single person from their firm to represent them. That to me is probably more problematic in the long term. Like I said, if we're in need of counsel a year from now and if somebody's sick, we don't stop. Maybe that's just a cold way to look at it. I'm not trying to be that way because I do totally understand, but we're talking a multi lawyer firm. I mean, somebody should have come and represented them. That's my opinion. And as I said, I think it's unfair at this point to the people that were here to be able to get that same information in advance. I'm not sure it's fair.
All right. Anybody else want to comment or? Mr. Horgan?
I guess I'd have 2 comments. The first being, it's such a large firm and such a preeminent firm in Massachusetts in terms of municipal law that I frankly don't think that the advantage that they gain by, if they even chose to watch the questions, I don't see it as being a meaningful difference for a firm like KP Law. I agree that it's unfortunate that they couldn't have somebody be here tonight, but they have no contractual obligation with us, unlike if they were town council, they certainly would be taking care of us in one way or fashion. I just think, we're not under any time constraints at this point to make a decision immediately. I think we've identified 3 firms and, frankly, you look at the qualifications, the one that we're talking about is the premier municipal law firm in the state. I'd like to see what they have to say.
Okay, thank you. Selectman Smith, did you want to chime in?
I'd like to hear from them, and I do think that Tracy is correct in saying that it is a big firm. They should have had a body come down, but I would like to hear from these folks.
Selectman Smith, Stone.
Ordinarily, I would say, sure, let them come. I'd like to hear from them, but Tracy has come up with some persuasive arguments, as far as I'm concerned, they do have a big advantage. I mean, think about it. Suppose we had our town council come at a second day after these other two firms. Would people be yelling favoritism? Of course they would. They would say, you're giving these guys an advantage that the others aren't getting. And like I said, I was predisposed to agree to have them come in, but I really can't find any fault with Tracy's logic, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And I am surprised that a firm of this size, I know what would happen if you went to court and somebody had a motion and you didn't show up, be allowed. They figured, if you're not there to oppose it, then and these guys are attorneys. It's not like they're laymen that don't know any better. I mean, they know the potential consequences of not coming up to the hearing. So I have a real problem with basic, fundamental fairness here. I think everybody should be on the same footing. No one should be have an extra advantage, and nobody should be disadvantaged. And by allowing them to come in after the fact, there's no question in my mind that at the very least, it gives the public the perception that we are favoring this particular law firm. And I'm sure you're gonna get some, shouldn't say, I'm sure, I wouldn't be surprised if you don't get some pushback from the other two law firms. If they're not the ones chosen. I would be assessing my legal options if I were one of the other two law firms and I did not get the job.
So you're saying that we could conceivably be acting in a way that disadvantages or provides an advantage, a competitive advantage? And we should maybe be clear on that legally? Is that the point? There's a potential legal
What are you
exposure?
gonna ask your current town council?
Oh, there you go.
No, I just, I think you gotta be fair
Well,
about
one
these
way
things.
you could tip the balance is you could ask different questions.
Suppose Jay,
So there is no advantage. You could
well,
mix up the questions.
suppose Jay Tollerman didn't show tonight. Would we be having the same discussion? Would we be saying, well, we're gonna let him come in after the fact? I don't think so. I think we'd
No.
be saying, no, we can't create that public perception.
Well, I think if he had COVID and it was reported to us at the last minute, then
But the
Yeah.
whole firm didn't have COVID.
Well, that's.
no, I understand that, but it got reported at a certain time. They obviously, our meeting starts at 5. We got what, a contact when? 2:00?
Oh, it was after 2, and then the second one, when they called to indicate that they couldn't make it on the Zoom, was probably after 4.
Yeah, that the fact that it got reported late, I think is clearly,
I think if it was important to them, they would have made arrangements for somebody to represent the company and at least ask for something personally to us. I know that they left messages. It just doesn't strike me as, I'm not going to repeat what I said.
well, I personally, I'm very comfortable. I want to interview all the candidates. I want to hear from them. I think if there's a way to tip the balance in adjusting the questions, I would ask the administrator to look at that and explore that. So we get truly 3 very good interviews. And it's not like this hasn't come up before. This comes up a lot. When you're
Give me an example of when it came up before.
I'm talking about situations in which you're interviewing for candidates for jobs, particularly in an era of COVID. How many times have we been involved, or not the board necessarily, but I mean, when you're interviewing for department positions, division
Individual
positions,
people.
it comes up a lot.
I think an individual person, I mean, if it was.
We're
a one-person
hiring-
If it was a one-person law firm, that the person had COVID, I'd maybe feel different. And no, they have no contractual obligation to us, but if, like I said, I feel like if it was important to them, somebody could have jumped on a Zoom meeting.
Now, I hear what you're saying. I'm very comfortable going forward to interview, make sure that we hear from all 3 firms. So those are my thoughts.
I won't be participating in an additional interview after tonight.
Is there anybody else that seeks to be heard? And
I agree with Tracy. I don't know if I'm going to participate or not. I'm not going that far at this point in time, but I think we can. I think we have some legal problems. I think we have some ethical problems. And I think we have some problems with the public, the perception of how we are conducting this search. And I want to make it clear to the people out there that Michael Stone believes in fundamental fairness. He believes that everybody should be treated the same, that nobody should be put at an advantage or disadvantage. And those are my views, and I'll stay steadfast to those principles.
anybody else seek to be heard? Is anybody would like to make a motion? Dan?
I'd make a motion that we schedule an interview. I like the idea of changing the questions, but at a time that can be arranged convenient to this board and to the representatives from the law firm.
Do I have a second? I'll second the motion. So we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any discussion? Well, I would just like to say, I agree with Mike Stone in that we should be as fair as be fair and proceed in the most ethical and most objective way. But I don't see any value in denying ourselves the opportunity to hear from the other firm. And I understand that there are two board members that feel differently about that. But I feel it's important for us to go through the process of reviewing applicants for this position. And it's our job, at least I see it as my job, to make sure that the town gets the best and most qualified people to do work on its behalf. And
Well, I just
So-
have to say, we didn't deny them. First
no, I understand. I understand. Right now, we're having,
want to deny them. We didn't deny them. They denied it. They're not here.
talking about denying to ourselves as a board. Is there any more discussion? Selectman Smith, did you have your pen raised?
Chairman, it looks like, does somebody have their hand up?
This isn't a public hearing, is it?
No, I don't know.
No, I
guess
don't
it
see
is.
anybody
It
with a
is-
hand.
it is
There may be
public
somebody in the audience, but
Vida.
It's not public. We're not in the middle
Yeah,
of a public discussion.
yeah, I don't know who that is. Can you read that?
This is a public, but we don't.
No, we're not taking, I just don't know who that person is that's seek, oh, yeah, it's, okay. Yeah, there's no, Vita, there's no, I see your hands raised, but this is not up for public discussion. Selectman Smith, did you want to say something? I saw your pen raised.
I have a real dilemma on this one. I see the merits to both sides of the argument, but I'm leaning towards hearing from the third firm.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think we should, call for a vote.
I'd like it to be a roll call vote for the record.
Okay, roll call vote. Selectman Stone,
No.
Selectman Post,
No,
Selectman Horgan,
Yes.
Selectman Smith,
Yes.
Chair votes aye. So it carries 3-2. Okay, so
is town council a majority vote contract? Just out of curiosity by charter?
we'd have to check.
I have the charter right here. The Board of Selectmen shall appoint a town council by affirmative vote of at least 4/5 of the members of the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you.
And there's no term that's mentioned. in
There's
the
no
charter.
term that's mentioned. Okay, well, thanks for clarifying that. Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I'm stopping.